Tom Rupsis. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Though this fact might have escaped a couple of you, November 28th is celebrated on at least 3 continents as my sister's birthday. So tonight, in a twist on the traditional invocation, I thought I'd like to invoke her spirit as we gather to do business for the people of Billings. Marguerite's a frequent and gracious host, always looking to welcome people into her home for a dinner party, a long weekend, or just a drop-in for some lively conversation and a glass of Prosecco. In that vein, let us strive to make Billings a welcome place for all, to live, work, and play, or simply to visit and enjoy all that Billings has to offer. Marguerite works hard in all aspects of her life, excelling through focus, determination, and a will to win. Tonight, we recognize and appreciate all those who are creating wins for Billings through their own considerable efforts. Our first responders and all our city employees, our nonprofits, and our countless community volunteers, our schools and colleges, our entrepreneurs, and thriving businesses. May those of us in elected positions match their efforts through our own focus and determination. And finally, anybody who knows Marguerite is undoubtedly impressed by her ever-present laugh and boundless joy. In Montana, our days are growing shorter, so let's be quick to laugh and smile with those around us. As we enter this season of hope and light, let us recall the many reasons we have to be joyful and strive every day to spread cheer throughout the city. Council, thank you for indulging me with this untraditional invocation, and happy birthday, Marguerite.
Amen. Thank you very much. Denise, if you would call the roll, please.
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Shaw. Here. Gulick.
Here.
Neese.
Here.
Owen.
Councilmember Owen is excused. She's traveling, but might tune in by Zoom partway through the meeting, in which case, if you you notice that, Kevin, and could call my attention to it, the rest of us, that'd be great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Councilmember Joy.
Present.
Cheriki.
I am here.
Tidswell.
Here.
Purinton.
Here.
Boyette. Here. Repsis.
Here.
Mayor Cole.
Here. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes from October 24th, 2022. Are there any corrections or is there a motion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we approve minutes October 24th, 2022.
Is there a second? Councilmember Boyette. Any discussion? Seeing none, if in approval of adopting the minutes from October 24, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Minutes for November 14th meeting are pending, and we will get those at our next meeting. Any council courtesies this evening? Councilmember Treaky.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the Public Works Department because they were right and I was wrong about something. When I saw the 6 inches as the trigger for snow for when the residential plowing got initiated, I thought that was too low. I thought the amount of snow should have been higher. Well, after this last storm, which was pretty much 6 inches, I was gone most of that week. But when I came back 5 days later, there were ice ruts in the roads around town. So if we hadn't have worked to remove them and the weather had stayed the way it was, we would have had rights. So you guys were right. I was wrong. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any other council courtesies? Okay. We don't have any proclamations this evening. Any council reports? Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Just a quick update from the Council Legislative Committee. We met last week, reviewed the 6 bills from the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee and the Montana League of Cities and Towns tenants. And our plan is to bring forward a recommendation for this body to approve after our final meeting in December, which is December 14th. So look for that at our last December meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other council reports? Seeing none, our city administrator reports. Chris.
Mayor and Council, it's just a handful of items here. So when you get to item 6, which is my employment agreement, I do have a hard copy of that red line strikeout version of page 4, section 7B. The packet, the final version was correct. The red line strikeout version was not the correct language. So I'll pass it out when you get to that point. Reminder that there's only one work session in December, customary, then the second 2 meetings in December are regular meetings, so that we can take off at time around Christmas and New Year's. And then the New Year's holiday happens to fall on a Monday. So we were looking at the calendar the other day, so just to flag it for you. No, we will not have a meeting on Monday, June the 2nd, but we will on Tuesday, January 2nd, thank you. But we will on Tuesday, January the 3rd. So that's the normal shift for that. And then City Attorney Gina Dahl is going to cover item 1B on the consent. And you'll be able to look at the screen and see some clarifications on the contract between the city and NAI.
Thank you, Matt, very much. Gina?
Thank you. On the consent agenda, item 1B, the consultant services agreement with Matt Robertson Brokerage, Inc. That agreement has been edited and modified, and you can see that in front of you. Exhibit A has 2 edits that you can see redlined above to clarify when they would receive a fee for renewal of leases. And that was just to clarify that that fee would only be received when the consultant is asked to negotiate those renewals. It does not apply to automatic renewals. And then above, and number 2 just clarifies what net lease means, and that includes the base rent amount and does not include any other charges that the tenant would pay or might possibly pay. So just those 2 clarifications. So if you, when you're approving consent agenda, the recommendation of staff is to approve the agreement as you're seeing it up there. So there's not really any need to remove it from consent. It's just to clarify that that's what the staff recommendation is.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then to public comment on non-public hearing agenda items. So this evening, those are items 1, 4, 5, and 6. So if you'd like to comment on anything under the consent agenda, that's number 1, and then all the sub-items. The Stillwater building, number 4, the options for that, the Dick Anderson contract for the Stillwater building on number 5, or city administrator's contract number 6. Now is your opportunity to do that. You won't have an opportunity to comment on those things later. So now is your time to comment on those if you would like to. Everything else there is a public hearing on, and you can wait for items 2 and 3 because we'll have a public hearing on those later. Is there any public comment on items 1, 4, 5, and 6? Just ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address up front. No one is coming forward, and there is no one online to comment. So we will close the public comment period on those non-public hearing items and move first to the consent agenda. Just a reminder, with that item 1B, the staff recommendation includes the 2 edits described by Gina. Let's go to separations. Are there any separations from the consent agenda? Councilmember Ipsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I need to recuse myself from 1J2.
1J2, bills for the week of October 24th. Councilmember Ipsis abstains. Any further abstentions or separations? Okay, if not, is there a motion relating to all items other than that one abstention? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve the consent agendas as written, with the exception of item 1B, which would include the staff recommendations as stated earlier, and also with the abstaining of Councilman Rupsis for 1G.
Okay, so 1B is included for approval, but with that understanding. Very good. Councilmember Shaw on the second. Any discussion? Any discussion on the consent agenda? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. If in favor of approval of those items, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Then item 1J2, the bills for the week of October 24th. Councilmember Rupsis, I think our ordinance does require that you just identify the reason for your abstention, so I'll hand it to you, and then I'll look for a motion.
Alternatives Incorporated is a client of mine.
And that's one of the payees on that list.
Payees on the bill, yeah.
That's right. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we approve bills of the week, October 24th, 2022, with Councilmember Rupsis abstaining.
Thank you very much. Second, Councilmember Tidswell. Any discussion? Motion is for approval. If in favor of the motion for approval, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. That motion passes unanimously, with the exception of Councilmember Rupsis, who abstained. That concludes then consent agenda and brings us to our regular agenda and item number 2. Denise, would you read item number 2?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance for zone change 1019, located at lots 2 and 3, block 1, Zimmerman Home Place subdivision, third filing. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 criteria.
Thank you very much. Our presenter tonight is our zoning coordinator, Nicole Cromwell. So once she has her magic machine powered up, we'll turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is property located on Zimmerman Trail. It's undeveloped property right now, currently zoned neighborhood office, will be zoned or is proposed to be zoned corridor mixed use 1. The Zoning Commission conducted its public hearing on November 1st and is forwarding a recommendation to you of approval of the requested zone change. I will point out at this stage that there was a protest filed against the zone change, and based on the signatures on that protest petition, it is considered a valid protest. So it requires a 2/3 majority in order to approve the zone change this evening. So that would be 7 votes in favor, as 10 members are sitting and voting this evening. So the existing zoning is neighborhood office. And this was a zoning that updated from the previous zoning of residential professional for this entire length between Colton Boulevard and Avenue E on the west side of Zimmerman Trail. It allows offices, which for professionals or medical offices, 1 to 4 unit dwellings, as a standalone use, doesn't have to be in the same building as a commercial use. It allows personal and business services, including small animal veterinary services, daycare centers, schools, studio and instruction services, as well as banks. So the building and site regulations for neighborhood office allow a 75% lot coverage, and that only counts roofed structures, not pavement. There's a minimum setback, not a build-to zone. In other words, you can set that building as far back on the lot as you want to, but you can't have parking in front of the building, so it makes sense to bring it closer, although not required. The maximum height is 2.5 stories, and story heights are dictated in those regulations of 9-foot minimum or 12-foot maximum, so the possible maximum height of the occupied space of the building is 30 feet, on which you can add a roof, which is not occupied. The corridor mixed use 1, the allowed uses are all the same uses as allowed in neighborhood office, but it adds retail and uses that can go beyond the normal 8 to 5 workday. So it includes nighttime uses. It includes dwellings in a mixed-use building. They cannot be separate structures, like just an apartment building. It has, if you're going to do residential uses, they have to be in a commercial mixed-use building. It allows retail of all types, animal services of all types, restaurants with or without alcohol service, and with and without drive-through services. The location, yes.
Sorry, with a little break in the action. Jennifer did just join us. For her to be able to see the presentation, we just need to share it. So if you can give us just a moment here for a technology adjustment.
Okay, all right.
And she'll be able to participate and vote as well.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you
So
very
that
much.
means that you have 11 members, so that vote will be 8.
Thank you. And Nicole, just so that there's no question about Councilmember Owen's ability to vote on this item, since you just started, but she might have missed the very beginning, would you just do a brief recap of what you've just said so that there's no question about her being fully informed?
Okay.
Councilmember Owen?
Mayor, I've heard her entire presentation.
You did. Okay, very good. Just want to get that on the record to be clear. So you don't
need to share the screen in order for her to see it, right? So,
Thank you, Nicole.
sure. Oh, okay. So you have the control. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So can we go to slideshow? Okay. Very good. Thank you. So as I said, this is a zone change from neighborhood office to corridor mixed use 1. And I explained the neighborhood office uses and the building and site regulations. I also explained that there's a valid protest petition that was filed on October 19th. And that's valid only because of the number of signatures that they gained from the owners within 150 feet. We'll go over that more thoroughly in a minute. So the corridor mixed use 1, as I said, allows all the same uses, but it adds retail, it adds restaurants, it adds more service type businesses to that zoning allowed uses. But this location may not have a bar or a casino because of its adjacency and nearby residential zoning. So there's no waivers to that anymore. And so you can't even apply, basically, for that type of use. It doesn't mean that you can't have alcohol service in a restaurant. It means it can't be a bar or a casino as we've defined it. The lot coverage goes down to 65% because corridor mixed use 1 lots are supposed to be larger than a neighborhood office lot. It has a build to requirement rather than a minimum setback. And that build to requirement is 5 foot minimum, 20 foot maximum. There is a little leeway to go a little further back, but it still requires the building to be at the street, in this case, Zimmerman Trail. It does have a parallel interior street, so design considerations haven't been worked out on that yet, but these two lots have double frontage, so we'll figure that out when they get to their design stage. The maximum height is 4 stories. There is no absolute numeric maximum, but it's 4 occupied stories, and the ground floor minimum height is 12 feet, maximum is 18. So a 12-foot height on a ground floor lends itself to commercial or retail uses. Upper stories are 9-foot minimum or 12-foot maximum, and that lends itself to other types of uses like offices or residences. So the maximum possible height of occupied spaces using the max for each floor is 54 feet, but that's only if they build a 4-story building. Okay, here are the 2 subject parcels It's not showing you the lot lines yet because this is a brand-new subdivision, but those are the two lots there. So they're bracketed on the north and the south by neighborhood office, because the neighborhood office is supposed to be at those intersections that lead into neighborhoods off of arterial or collector streets. So those are staying neighborhood office. The one on the very corner of Zimmerman and Avenue E is the children's clinic. Then there's another lot to the west of that that will be neighborhood office. And then this lot up here at Colton and Zimmerman will remain neighborhood office as well. To the east across Zimmerman Trail is neighborhood 3 or suburban neighborhood. It's a single family zoning district. There's also some NX1 shown in the green there, which is a 1 to 4 family zone district. We have more neighborhood office to the south, right here on the east side of Zimmerman. We have quarter mixed use 1 here south of Avenue E, and that goes all the way to Grand Avenue. And that is all owned by Town Pump. All those lots are owned by them. We have neighborhood mixed use here. Public 1 are these lighter green. NX3 or mixed residential 3, which is apartment buildings. Those are under construction right now. We have N2 here along Colton Boulevard. So I wanted to show you the previous zoning map, because we're not quite 2 years since we changed this, to show you what the previous zoning scheme looked like. So this entire parcel here, very large parcel, it was subdivided as a large block, but could have been further subdivided, and it is being done right now, was residential professional. Under the former zoning, it had the same sorts of uses, but it only allowed single family only for residential choice in the residential professional. Then we had community commercial, our universal commercial zone, where anything from hardware stores and lumber yards to Kohl's and big multifamily apartments could all be in the same zone. We also had neighborhood commercial here, public zoning here, residential multifamily restricted, and then the R96 here. So when we updated the map, we kind of stayed true to translating that RP to a neighborhood office as was before. And then we did this zone change here. We did another zone change here a month ago. All of this community commercial updated to corridor mixed use 1, just because the lots were smaller and because it's kind of into that neighborhood off of Grand. Here's an aerial of the subject property, kind of showing some surrounding buildings. So we have the children's clinic here at the corner. That building height is 35 feet. So that's approximately what you could see in a neighborhood office zone right now, maybe a little taller. We have the Heenan and Cook building in the neighborhood office over here. That's only 18 feet. It's a single story. It has a lower first floor height. And the OBGYN clinic is also 34 feet here. The NX3 zone property here has apartment buildings that are 3 stories. I wanted to make sure I wasn't saying that wrong. But most of the homes here in the patio homes and unit ownerships on the east side of Zimmerman are single-story homes, usually 19 to 22 feet tall. But as you can see, they are separated by quite a distance between this property here and their backyards here. It's over 125 feet between those two, and it has 4 lanes of traffic and boulevards and trees and lots of things in between. So as I said, the zoning commission is forwarding a recommendation of approval. They believe that it does meet the goals and policies of the city of Billings, the West Billings Neighborhood Plan. It's an efficient use of land, promoting the well-designed and pedestrian-friendly urban environment. It encourages mixed use and infill development. It encourages those uses along arterial corridors. And it locates services and shopping close to where people live. The corridor mixed use one is not intended to serve all of Billings. It's intended to serve a neighborhood or a small geographic area. It's intended to be compatible with adjacent residential uses. And that's what you'll see along some of our corridors. Where it was community commercial, it's now corridor mixed use one because it shares an alley with a residential neighborhood to the south or to the north. There are also use standards that we didn't have in the old code for different types of uses in our commercial districts. So the existing zoning and uses east across Zimmerman Trail are separated by at least 125 feet, and they all have solid fencing that backs up to Zimmerman Trail. As I said, we did receive a protest petition, and the valid protest requires at least a 2/3 majority vote of the present and voting members of the city council in order to approve the zone change. The valid protest does not affect the zoning commission recommendation. It's only a provision that applies to the city council vote. Of course, they can consider that as testimony during the zoning commission hearing, and they did. So on a map, this shows you that 150-foot protest area, but because these are unit ownerships, it includes all the units, even though those units are not within 150 feet, because each person owns a part of that common area. So each unit has a vote for a valid protest. Here's the subject property from Zimmerman Trail looking north and west. You can see the apartments under construction off Green Valley Drive. This is looking north on Zimmerman Trail on the west side. And then east across Zimmerman Trail to the townhomes, their backyards, back up to Zimmerman Trail. Oops. Here's the children's clinic, which will be just south of the proposed zone change. So that's 35 foot tall. And this is looking directly south towards Grand Avenue. And then a little bit off the street, looking north to Colton Boulevard. Again, here are the 10 review criteria. The zoning commission's findings and recommendations are in your staff report. I'll be happy to answer any of those questions on those. And here is the subject property again, showing Green Valley Drive. Sorry, I covered the GR. This is Green Valley Drive, Collector Street, Zimmerman Trail and Arterial Street, Colton Boulevard, and Avenue E to the north and south. And I think, okay, and here's an aerial view of the property, and I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Nicole. We'll open up for questions, and then we'll have a public hearing on this item, and then back to council. Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mayor. It's not a 4-lane, Nicole, it's a 2-lane, one on each side.
Right, I'm sorry.
So
It's
I
not
was-
4 lanes yet, but there's enough right of way to do that in the future if needed.
We're going to need it, but I was just wondering, have we done any traffic studies yet, or is that,
Yes,
and
they did a traffic study for the subdivision that preceded this one, the second filing, that included the zoning, the proposed zoning and uses, potential uses for these 2 lots. So they factored that in already. Part of the testimony at the zoning commission hearing was about the developer's contributions to the off-site improvements for intersections. One of those will be a traffic signal at Avenue E and Zimmerman Trail. And they will be contributing at least a quarter of the cost of that, which I believe is about $90,000. So they've committed to that contribution regardless of whether this zone change goes through or not. So there'll also be other improvements, and I'll let the applicant tell you all about those.
Are we going to put a light at Ace Hardware? I was there Sunday and I couldn't even get out onto the road. So we need one at Ace, okay?
Well, the interesting thing about signalizing a corridor like this is that it allows breaks in the traffic where you don't experience them now. So lights are timed so that there will be breaks at those uncontrolled or stop-controlled intersections. But I never try to go left at Ace, never.
That is a bit of a challenge, and we'll give the applicant an opportunity once your questions are up to say anything the applicant might want to. Councilor Pearson?
Thank you. So Nicole, if you could go back to the map on the protest area.
Get there.
Just so that I'm clear, the people to the east of Zimmerman,
Right.
so where is the 150-foot? Is that where the
That's
outer?
the dashed line.
Okay. So are you saying that people on the other side of the street, because it's common area?
Right, all these people on
Oh,
Hampton
I'm looking at the
Place.
wrong, sorry, looking at the wrong map.
Right. So this, all of these that are highlighted in purple,
Okay,
plus all of these units down here.
correct. Okay, that's what I wanted to find out.
Right.
And so the ones that I saw that are really more intent on protesting are the ones that back up to Zimmerman.
Yes.
Okay, so that was the other question that I had. It kind of coincides with what Mike was talking about, that boulevard that's along Zimmerman. Would that have to be removed eventually? Take it out? Because it's only a 2-lane now.
Right, I can't predict what that design would look like in the future, but the city did acquire enough right-of-way so that if they had to make it a 4-lane arterial street, they could. Whether they do that towards the center or towards the sides, that would be up to them.
So just one final question. I think I saw in the memo where they were saying there would be some sort of traffic improvements at Colton and, see, was it Colton and Zimmerman or Polly and Zimmerman?
I'm not sure. The applicant has all the details from the traffic study, which he did share with the
Yeah.
neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is along the same lines because I know there's a stop sign farther up. That stop sign is still there, correct? When you're going up Zimmerman, there's a stop sign there. So is whatever they do in the traffic, will that impact having to signalize that area as well?
Well, Polly is signalized as well as Rimrock.
Oh, it is.
Colton,
Okay.
I don't believe that they designated Colton for a signal
Okay.
there.
Yeah, haven't been up there in a while. I just was, so if there are any changes, how far does that, I guess, and how far does these impacts really reach out around a development like this?
Well, generally, the minimum scope is a 1-mile radius.
1 mile, okay, thank you, that's within that. And then you mentioned that the build-to zone changed to where the property now is, I think, before it was 10 feet off, it has to be 10 feet off the roadway, if I understand that correctly, and
At a minimum.
at a minimum, and 30 feet high plus a roof would be the max. And then now it's going to 5 feet to
Be
the,
5 feet.
I'm sorry?
But it could be 5 feet, but we also have an arterial setback. It's 50 feet to the center. In this case, that doesn't impact the setback from property line.
Right. Yeah, so one of those pictures you showed, it looked to me like along the sidewalk there was a sidewalk and maybe 5 feet and then a bunch of weeds. So they could actually probably build two right there and you'd have a 54-foot wall of a structure right there?
The property line is the fence, the barbed wire fence,
Okay, so 5 feet off of that then.
5 feet off that.
you would see a 50-foot, up to a 50-foot wall right
It
there.
would be a
on the-
building that had to have windows and doors
Mm-hmm.
and entrances.
Right, not a wall. So you're going to have entrances on this side as well?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it would be beneficial to those ground floor occupants, lessors, to have a direct access from that path, as
Because
well
there's
as
really-
an entrance from the inside from the parking area.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there's really no traffic, you can't stop at Zimmerman, and there's no parking there, you can't, or can you?
There is a provision for one drive-in from Zimmerman to these two lots. It's a
Okay.
shared access. And it's only right in, right out because of the barrier
Sure.
there, the median. So it probably will be used some, but the primary entrances will be off Green Valley Drive and Avenue E.
Will there be parking along Zimmerman?
No,
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, any further questions before I go back to Councilmember Purington? Councilmember Purington?
Thank you, that reminded me of another question I had. So did I hear you say with the CMU one, I know that there was, ground floor would be commercial. Did I hear you say that the second floor could also be commercial or office buildings or something like that?
sure, you could build a multi-story building that has all commercial
Doesn't have
use.
to have that
It doesn't have to
residential.
have that mixed use. I know that that's the intent of this developer, but they don't have to do that.
Nicole, an analogy now is Shiloh Commons. That was developed before there was a CMU zone, but if it were being built today, is that a rough equivalent to what we're talking about in CMU 1?
It's a little bit taller than would be allowed in CMU 1 or CMU 2 because both CMUs have the same building height allowance. I believe there was a variance for the building height on Shiloh Commons. It also would be a little bit closer to the street than the Shiloh Commons buildings are now. But it's very close to what you could build under the current zoning for CMU 1.
Okay. All right. Very good. Any other questions for Nicole? I'll give the applicant an opportunity here in just a minute. Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on, tacking on to that, Shiloh Commons, the buildings are perpendicular to Shiloh, parallel to Central. Would they have to be parallel to Zimmerman? Is that the intention here? Or could they also be built perpendicular like they are at Shiloh Commons?
Well, the short end of the building facing the
Yeah,
street and the
yeah.
long end going the other direction. You could, but you still have to treat that street front as the front facade. So it has to have the doors and the windows and all the things that you are required to put on the front of a building.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. Another question regarding the zoning. Can you put up zoning map again real quick?
Maybe?
Okay, that's good enough. So that whole area is going to be changed to the CMU one. My concern is, I think the height close like that, building large height near Zimmerman, where residential is just right across the street. I know it's a long ways away, but it's still in their backyard. If we were to do a zoning, can we allow or zone only all of the property they're asking to CMU one, except for maybe 50 feet to the east side of the property? Is that something we can condition and not approve 50 feet of that? So we'll make sure we have an additional setback on that.
It's been done once that I recall, and that was for the Dover Ranch zone change, and I think that was in 2007. That was a floor amendment. They wanted a certain zone, but it was directly adjacent to some existing R96 zone. And so the council decided at that time, legal or not, that they were going to do the zone change except for a 200-foot strip on the south and the east boundary of the property.
Okay, thank you.
Right now, that property is all one zoning because it's all intended to be single-family zoning, so we only have one single-family only zoning district. So we don't have 6 like we used to have.
Okay, thank you very much.
I mean, I would defer to Gina Dahl as city attorney. You can't grant a zoning that wasn't advertised. And it's very unusual to grant a partial zoning request.
And just to be clear, that's not the request that's before us. The applicant hasn't made that request of a strip.
No, they have not made that.
Councilmember Gulick.
Well, just to follow up, Mayor, then.
Okay.
Because initially you said, yes, it has been done, so I'm assuming that can be done, but now I'm a little concerned
Well,
that
I'm
you're
not
saying, no,
sure
it
it was
can't be
legal
done.
when it was done in 2007.
I see.
The
Okay.
owner allowed it to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gulick.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Is there, in terms of sign code, would there be any particular concern for residents across the street of signs that are really high, like, up at 50 feet above the ground, or would they all be, do the requirements for the facade require that it be down just above the commercial storefronts?
Right. Well, for a multi-tenant building like this, there's a maximum of 250 square feet for all tenants together for wall signs that face the street. Since this has 2 street frontages, that amount applies to both street frontages on the facade of the building. That's wall signs. But because of this corridor mixed use 1 building and siting requirements, they're also allowed to have like a canopy sign that's over an entryway or awning signs. And those don't count to that maximum amount of wall signs. A wall sign is a different type of attached sign. So there are limitations on area that we didn't have before. It was basically a simple math problem of 3 square feet of attached signs for a linear foot of building frontage on a street. And you didn't even have to put that signage on that street frontage. You could move it anywhere on the building. So buildings that were 100 feet long got 300 feet of signage allowed on the building, even if they only had 1 tenant. So now it's, okay, each tenant can have a wall sign. The total number or the total area is 250 square feet. So our sign code is devised to fit with those building and siting requirements. You can still have lighted signs. You can have what we call those electronic message display signs. But in this zone district, they're not allowed to have any animation. It has to be a single block of graphics that instantaneously changes to another block of graphics. It can't have spinning dollar signs or falling leaves or things similar to that. So we also have we now count window signs as wall signs if they're covering too much of the window. So I expect that those new tenants would follow that sign code.
Okay. Anything else for Nicole? I'm sorry, Councilor Pritchett?
Types of signs?
The height of the.
Oh, the
sign.
height of signs, right. Any freestanding sign cannot be taller than 25 feet as from the crown of the road that it reads to. And you only get 1 freestanding sign per property. With a building that's all the way up at the street frontage, a freestanding sign may work. If you only had 1 user or 1 tenant, 1 anchor, then that might work. But something like this is probably more suited to a monument sign.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, thank you. Don't go away. Do we have any sort of presentation or request to speak by the owner or developer or the representative? Scott?
Picture, do you want
That's fine. Yep, that works. Thank you. For the record, my name is Scott Aspenleiter, performance engineering agent for the developer. The developer is also here to speak on behalf of the project, so I'll stick to the technical sides of things in the process. As we went through this, we put forward our neighborhood meeting letter. We had proposed to do that through a virtual meeting. About 2 days before, we were notified that, the neighborhood across Zimmerman is mainly a retirement community with elderly folks, and that was not something that was going to work. We went through with that meeting. We didn't get any participation. Following that, we submitted our application to get our information in. But in conversation with the neighborhood, we postponed, or we requested that the zoning commission postpone the hearing and delay our application so that we could do an in-person neighborhood meeting. In that process, we had gotten word that there was questions about a legal protest and what that took. So what our hope was that in postponing that to do an in-person meeting, we'd be able to actually sit down with the neighbors and have a conversation and get some participation. That protest was completed before our neighborhood meeting. And at our neighborhood meeting, we had 3 people show up. That was the participation that we got from the neighbors. So it was disappointing in the process to go through that. We had a great conversation with the 3 ladies that showed up. We answered a lot of their questions. We gave them information, emailed them, gave them hard copies to share with their neighbors. I think we talked through the vast majority of the concerns outside of the height, which is probably no shock to you. So in the process of going through this, I think it's worth noting that meeting with the neighbors and neighborhood participation and all that, that's all great in theory, but that's also a two-way street. As developers, I feel like in this instance in particular, we went above and beyond to try to engage with the community and got no engagement in return, and very little comment in return. If you look at the log from the zoning commission, the 3 ladies that showed up to meet with us also showed up to the zoning commission. And then there were 2 other folks. One just there to get information and to understand what was going on. And a second to speak against the application. Again, the second forum to have real dialogue and 0 participation. We've tried to engage and to do what we can. This is also the first time in my career that we've actually had a traffic study done at the time of a zone change. That's a comment that we get from you every time, Councilman Neese, every time. And we have it this time. That was something that was planned out by the developer. The subdivision improvements agreement builds off of that traffic study, which anticipated this zone change, which in turn increased his financial contributions from the traffic projections. Those things are now inked. He is contributing that, whether this zone change passes or not, but it was done in good faith under the assumption that this was gonna come forward at some point in time, and we would be able to actually answer these questions that you have with respect to traffic and safety implications. Overall, he's going to contribute almost $180,000 to intersection improvements, $91,000 to the stoplight at Avenue E and Zimmerman Trail. The other 80-some thousand will get spread amongst Grand and Zimmerman, Poly and Zimmerman, Rimrock and Zimmerman and Colton and Zimmerman, I believe. And there are some outliers out on Grand as well that we had to analyze. But the bulk of that happens in that Zimmerman corridor at Avenue E and at the intersection with Grand and Zimmerman. We're going to pay our fair share. We've accounted for that. We've accounted for what we're going to add to the transportation and that network. And we're coming to the table knowing and being able to answer that question wholeheartedly and honestly for you tonight. Again, that's the first time that we've been able to do that in my career. So I think the other things that are important to note here are this is the type of infill development that is intended on arterial roads. This is an arterial. Had the stuff to the east been raw ground right now, you would not be able to build single-family houses on an arterial. Our code and our growth policy, as you have approved it in the modification, would not allow the construction of what's constructed on the east side of Zimmerman now. So we are in a weird gray area where we're trying to marry and mesh old code with new code. And that puts developers like us in a predicament. I mean, we're trying to do what the city is asking for in the growth policy with tighter densities, mixed use on corridors to bring services to communities. And I'll tell you, I live on Collin Drive, just 2 blocks north of this. My company has under contract the corner lot on Colton and Zimmerman, and we're going to build an office building on that corner, 2-story office building on that corner in the neighborhood office. We need this type of development in this part of town. My family would love to be able to walk or ride our bike down to a restaurant in this area. The people that are going to move into these apartment buildings across Green Valley Drive are going to look to have these types of amenities to be able to walk to and not have to drive. This is the type of development that our growth policy calls for, and it plays off of what's going on in this portion of Zimmerman Trail. Zimmerman Trail has a lot of historic value from Rimrock to the top of the heights. But remember, this portion of Zimmerman Trail was built in 2008. And it was built with growth of our city in mind. It's an arterial with 110 foot of right of way for 5-lane traffic. I mean, that's your template with the city. That can be done without eliminating the boulevard sidewalks. You have that. You'll lose the center median, but there's enough space to accommodate that. With the construction of the inner belt loop, we're gonna have more traffic coming down Zimmerman Trail. This is not a residential road. It's a principal arterial for our community on the west end, and it's gonna have traffic. We're contributing to that, but I think it's a fallacy to carry the notion that this is a residential road and we need to protect it as a residential road. It's not. It's a principal arterial, and it's gonna only get busier. And I know that's hard for the people that have lived there for 20 years to believe and want to believe, but that's coming. That's how our city is growing, and that's how you've planned it to grow. So,
Scott, would you kind of wrap up and then introduce the developer?
Sure. So with those things, I think what we have put forward meets the intent. Nicole's done a good job of explaining that, and we are putting forward a product that we can be proud of, and we're open to other ideas or suggestions, but this is a product that we think and feel meets the criteria.
Thank you very much. And who else do we have with us tonight?
Preston Lees, with the several different companies that own the property. Glad to be here tonight. I've come before you a few times. I get just as nervous every time, so I am excited to be part of this project. I wanted to just give you a quick vision. My family has been in this area for 3 generations. We've been excited to contribute and build residential and commercial developments for 2 generations of that. I'm excited to be part of this. When we got to be looking at this project specifically, we interviewed actually, which I'd never interviewed to be able to put an offer in. But we interviewed the Zimmerman family, and it was really important to them to honor the legacy of that land. It'd been in the family since before Montana was a state. The Zimmerman family was responsible for building the Zimmerman Trail up the rims. They contributed land or sold land so that Zimmerman could connect from Rimrock down to Poly. So to them, it was super important to honor that legacy. And when we started down this project, we really wanted to provide a product that we could be proud of for many generations to come. And we've shown that, I believe, in what we've started. The NX3 zoning itself that we have on Block 2 and that we're currently under construction on allowed for four-level buildings. We could have put easily another 150 units in that section. But instead, we chose the garden-style 3-level apartments with greater green space and amenities to contribute and honor the land and what's been there. We want that place to be a place that I would be proud to live, that my kids would be proud to live. So we have basketball courts and pickleball courts. We have community gardens, and we want to continue that across the street. There is I think we all are aware that there's a serious financial and housing crisis that we're facing across the nation, and particularly here that we're exposed to. There's variables that are outside of our control, interest rates that are climbing, costs that are climbing, and that's just pushing it, making it harder for people to get into housing. This is a strategic plan to try and tackle that problem. We want to get more units there that people can enjoy to live in, that they don't feel like they're in a sea of asphalt. But still providing all of those amenities and the shopping and things that are in close proximity. As we move towards the west of the project, we're looking at townhome communities and things that hopefully will help solve some of the problems that we're facing and make some affordable options out there. There were a few questions that came up I just wanted to speak to. Although the zone allows you to get to 5 feet, I think it also allows you to go to 20 feet. And our intention is to be further back from the road. You can ask for a staff variance of 5 additional feet, I believe, Nicole, if I'm correct. So you could get to 25 feet. Our intention is to continue down the path that we've started and keep that green space along Zimmerman. There's talk about, could commercial continue to go up? Although it allows it, that's not our plan. Our plan is to provide housing with some food and retail options below. We don't want a full 4-story or 3-story building that's all commercial. Similar to Shiloh Commons, yes, in function, but we want more green space. Not speaking against Shiloh Commons, it offers some really good things, but I think it comes with some problems too, where there's not enough parking. It's really in a sea of asphalt. There's not much green space. That's not how we're designing and have currently started laying out this space. We want some nice courtyard space. We will likely go underground with the parking like Shiloh Commons did, and we've already checked the water levels, and that'll be not a problem structurally speaking. Also architecturally, we want to, again, honor the legacy of what Montana is, so our architecture will be different. For us, a little warmer, a little more inviting. A question was brought by Councilman Neese about the zone change line and where that was. If we had brought that 20 or 25 feet back, we talked about doing that because if we had done that, we likely wouldn't have, that 150 feet setback wouldn't have reached as far, and we probably would never have triggered the opportunity for the petition against us. We felt like that was maybe a little underhanded and maybe not as transparent. And so we elected not to do that. But you could have done that. And we would be willing to accept that because, again, our intention is not to go to the 5 feet. Other than that, we just, we've made a substantial and a giant part of our portfolio investment into this project. And this does have serious financial implications to us getting this zone change through. And so we would respectfully request that we're allowed to continue down the path that we've started down and tried to be very transparent along the way, having completed the traffic study ahead of time, understanding that, and being happy and willing to contribute to what we should to make that a beautiful part of the community. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll open it up for public hearing then. This is your opportunity to come forward if you'd like to comment on item number 2, the zone change that we've been discussing. We just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address.
Matt Robertson, 3531 Timberline Drive. Timberline is located just right up the street on Zimmerman Trail. I've loved the area. We are in dire need of more retail, more restaurants to service the neighborhood. I would urge you to vote in favor of zone change 1019. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on item number 2. This is a public hearing. Is there any further comment?
Mayor and Council, my name is Greg McCall. I'm with McCall Homes and McCall Development. My address is 6125 Norma Jean Lane. It's a new address, so I had to think about it for a sec. I also serve as a city zoning commissioner, and when this zoning application came before the commission, I recused myself from the vote for a couple of reasons. One, I, like Mr. Lees, also interviewed with the Zimmerman family and had given the opportunity, and had we had the resources available, we would have loved to have also participated in developing this property. I've met with Mr. Lees multiple times since then and have really appreciated his vision for what this area can be. Being that it's one of the largest left infill parcels surrounded on all sides by the city of Billings, it, as was brought up earlier, it's particularly challenging. But it's also a particularly incredible opportunity for us to utilize our new zoning and to look at what can be done from a mixed housing, mixed use standpoint. When this came forward, I knew that I needed to recuse myself from the vote because I'm hopeful of trying to build some of those townhomes that Mr. Lees spoke of earlier. So I felt in order to be transparent, I would just step away from the conversation. So I wasn't even able to discuss it at all with zoning commission. And, but I did ask Nicole if it was okay if I could come speak to you tonight, but that I wouldn't be speaking on behalf of the zoning commission. I further talked to Gina and she said, you can do that. You're a citizen. You can say why you think this is important. What is being proposed as in a CMU1 in this particular area would offer an additional housing choice that would currently not be made available unless we were able to have some level of mixed housing with commercial. I think it is a home run. I'm personally investing in it to a huge deal in our own development in Annafeld. We've got a 3-story mixed-use building that's almost ready for a certificate of occupancy, and we're looking forward to having folks be able to live in that building as another housing choice that we currently don't have unless you go downtown or to Shiloh Commons. It's the only other 2 places in town where you see those levels of mixture. This is really important. It is different, and it is hard when you've got folks that have lived there for a long time that are going to have to blend with some other opportunities. But you've got a developer here who's really willing to sit down and listen to them and try to work things out. And so I would also ask that you would follow the City Zoning Commission's recommendation to approve Zone Change 1019. Thank you. But that was not because I'm on the City Zoning Commission.
We got it.
Oops.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on this item number 2?
My name is Brian Ludwig. My address is 5445 Green Teal Drive. I appreciate the opportunity to just come and share my opinion. I own a business out on the west end of Billings. I don't have a whole lot more to add to what's already been said, only that I'm very much in favor of this development and this zoning change that's been proposed. I'm familiar with the area. I drive by it almost daily. My business is very close to this piece of land, and I'm familiar with what this developer has planned, and I think it would just be really fantastic for the city of Billings. So I would also ask you to consider approving this zoning change. I appreciate your consideration and your time.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment? This is a public hearing.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is John Halverson. I'm a professional planner, but I'm speaking tonight as a private citizen and as someone who, having lived in other markets that experienced the housing crisis before us, and saw those places become places where working people could not have a future, I am speaking tonight as someone who wants to see Billings remain a place where working people have a future. And that means increasing our housing supply. I think we think about this public input process as a very true form of direct democracy in which the people most affected by the decision have the most voice. And while living 110 feet from a 50 floor building, 50 feet tall building, sorry, will have some, nominal effect on your view. I would argue that the people most affected by this decision are the renters around Billings, Montana, the young people whose housing stability depends on the supply of housing keeping pace with demand. And those people have no, legal avenue to, support or oppose this project other than coming down here, writing letters, and we know that they tend not to do that because they're busy. They're busy keeping a roof over their head, and this process tends to skew toward, the moneyed, the landed, those kind of folks who I would urge you just to think about those renters, those people who cannot be here tonight, and to think about their future in Billings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment? Item number 2. There's no one online. No one is coming forward. So we will close the public hearing on item number 2. Come back to council. Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1019 and adopt the findings. Let's just turn off. Adopt the findings of the 10 criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Okay. That was the motion. Was there a second? Then Councilmember Joy, I heard you say. Okay. And I'll let you speak to your motion, and then we'll go to Councilmember Boyette. Councilmember Shaw, if you wanted to speak to your motion, it's up to you.
Yes, thank you. I will quickly. Change is tough. I know it's hard. I feel like we see these people come to council all the time or sign petitions. It's easy to sign a petition. It's harder to engage in the process, as was communicated. But it is the job of this body to look beyond just what the neighbors currently think or want and to the greater vision of the city. And so I think this is a great project. I think it's a great project for this area. I love that it's going to provide hopefully some places for neighbors to walk around and go to some of these businesses. So I'm in support, and I hope we see more projects like this in the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Joy, did you want to speak to your second?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, I am supporting this motion because it's exactly what our zoning calls for. It's exactly what we've planned for on the West End. We did not want to have, as the West End plan explains, they wanted to really address some of the issues that they thought previous development had not addressed and make something better than what already exists in older parts of the city. And I think they've done that by this plan. And I think this development is trying to address those things. Why is infill important? Infill is important because there's a thing called cost of services. There's a thing called providing service to our residents, the people who live in the city. And when we use the land effectively, when we use it efficiently, when we put development where land is sitting available and actually not generating income for the city or funding for our services, then the best thing for us to do for the entire city and all of our residents is to use our infill in order to help and spread those costs among everyone that uses our services. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, I know you're going to put a light down at, I think it's Avenue E, but I've tried to ride my bike down Colton from Boulder School, and I have to cross Zimmerman. That's only going to get worse. Have we done any walkability study for the kids trying to go back and forth between Arrowhead and Boulder School across the street that's becoming unbearable at some times during the day?
Right. I don't know the district boundaries for the schools. And I'm not sure if the school district has assigned a crossing guard to this location, because I think Arrowhead and Boulder, I mean, this may be the dividing line between the two districts. I know that part of that traffic study identified some improvements at Colton and Zimmerman, not just for cars, but for people who are traveling in different modes. So that is likely something that's on the radar of Public Works and in this traffic study, although I have not read it myself. It was part of that subdivision approval. So hopefully with the signals that will be installed and those other improvements, that the ability for people to safely cross that street there will get better. Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a great project and we'll be supporting the zone change. I think when we're, as a council, are considering projects, we're usually just think of it in terms of balancing the private property interests of the developer with neighborhood interests. But I would argue we also need to be balancing the community interest as well. I think the community interest is providing more housing, for one. In terms of traffic, I would argue that this project could actually, compared to the alternative of lower density developing, being pushed further west, this is actually going to result in less traffic because it's more walkable. It means that it's also an area served by Met Transit. So I think it improves the housing as well as affordability. And also is beneficial to the community in terms of our taxes, because if we are building more infill where we already have infrastructure, we're not having to and we have more tax revenue compared to the amount of the cost of services. We're going to be beneficial here in this infill as opposed to spreading further west. So I think balancing the interests of the community as well as the ability of the private property owner to develop their property, to keep the government from limiting what they can do with their property. I think that in my mind is weighs favorably for this zone change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. This is another tough one for me. What I'm looking at, I'm not looking at the traffic so much. I really am not, because honestly, I go that way instead of Shiloh whenever I'm going home. I think the traffic flows pretty good, other than getting out of Ace Hardware, but I don't go left there either. But I think my biggest issue is the character of the neighborhood. I think that's the one that I'm really hanging my hat on. Yes, it won't be a wall. I guess you have to have windows and whatever. But I think the height, excuse me, I think the height is the one that really is bugging me at this point, to be on Zimmerman with whatever else is there currently. There's not, that would be the tallest building at that point. The other thing is that once there's a zone change, you know, it almost doesn't matter what the developer wants to do because he's allowed to do the 3-story buildings, the 4-story buildings. And I think that's my biggest issue with it right now. Whenever you talk about, some of the council members talking about affordable housing, this is, I think I saw where Mr. Less was saying that it would be market value apartments. For a lot of people, those aren't affordable because of the inflation rate and everything that's going on right now. I think they just have a hard time with having workforce housing. I mean, I guess it depends on those jobs that you have. But I'm really having a hard time thinking this is going to be a good fit for that neighborhood. Like I said, I'm not concerned about traffic. I'm concerned about the character of the neighborhood at this point. So unless someone has something really good to tell me, I probably would not vote to approve this at this point.
Thank you very much. We'll hear from Councilmember Rupsis, and Councilmember Owen has her hand up, so we'll go to Councilmember Owen after Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Like Councilmember Purinton, this is a really hard one for me. Mr. Lees, you hit all my trigger words. Everything you were saying, I love what you're, the way you're coming about the project and the way you're building out the entire block there. And so for me, this is a 50-50 call. I could easily go either way, and honestly, if you were coming with neighborhood mixed use, it probably wouldn't even be a question. You could do all the same kind of mixed commercial as well as residential, tick both boxes, and probably fit more in the character of that neighborhood. But like Councilmember Purinton, I'm concerned about transitional zones between our higher level, higher density and volume commercial areas and our residential areas. And what's really driving this home for me right now is the development at 3038 Central and the impact on those neighborhoods right behind it. Yeah. I know we didn't do anything to change that zone. That's been that way for 20 years. But I think that, to me, it highlights the need to be cognizant of the transitions between these high density and existing neighborhoods. And to the point where I'm somewhat reconsidering or regretting or reconsidering my vote on the Elks property, because I think Councilmember Neese was talking a lot about that transitional area on the eastern side of that property. And I didn't fully recognize that at that time. And so this is really weighing on my mind right now as we go about doing a lot of very needed projects in the community. We need housing, we need mixed use, we need a lot of these types of developments. And like I said, I really like the way you're going about it. But I think for me, this is just a one step too far in terms of the intensity of that development in that particular location. And like Councilmember Purinton said, it's not even just about, the 3 or the 4 stories. If it's CMU 1, that doesn't commit us to housing there. It basically anything, it opens up the grounds for anything that fits in a CMU 1 zone. Regardless of your best intentions right now, anything could happen. So I think we have to think about what that land use possibly could be. And to me, that continuation of CMU 1, when there's already a lot of CMU 1 south on Zimmerman as well as along Grand in this same block, is again just a step too far. So for me tonight, I have to vote against this. Like I said, I wish it was a neighborhood mixed use coming together with a lot of the same kind of concepts, but just at a slightly lower density. I'd probably be all for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to support this project tonight for a couple of reasons that I just wanted to throw out there for people to consider. I appreciate it when community leaders developers and builders and investors when they try to find ways to come alongside government and achieve important public policy goals while still running a business and being profitable. And I think this project is really an example of that. Council has articulated, and I mean, the community is screaming for a need for more housing. Yes, affordable housing, and yes, workforce housing, but just housing in general. Housing choices, more of it, even higher point housing that allows people to move out of units that may be more affordable. We just need more. And here we have a project that does that. Our number one overarching priority is public safety. And from what I'm hearing, even though it's not the core of the zone change, but from what I'm hearing, this project is being designed to achieve some of those public safety goals. It's keeping a neighborhood active. It's keeping eyes on the street. It's giving us that built environment resiliency so that we have safer neighborhoods, more active and engaged neighborhoods, and I appreciate that. From a process perspective, we want our citizens more involved in government, and we have here a project where the developer and the project leads have gone above and beyond the public engagement process to try to do that. We've asked people in the development community, please work with neighbors, try to resolve their issues, talk to them, hear them, listen to them, and they've done that. And I think that's commendable. We've asked developers, we need skin in the game to address traffic issues or mitigate the impact of development. And we've had that happen here. I mean, this is a project that checks a lot of boxes in terms of not just the outcomes that we want, but the process we want. And I think that really matters. I think this is what corridors are for. And you know, I've lived in other communities, like a lot of council members, where I've seen these developments really be beautiful and work. I appreciate the acknowledgement of green space. So even though we do have the higher density without that transition, you know, the Elks vote was really hard for me. I don't think we made the right choice there. But here we have a developer who's listening, saying, you know what, we need green space. We need something that feels more integrated to the community, something that isn't just pavement on pavement. And we're getting that here. So I think I think the thoughtfulness that has gone into this project matters, and I think the commitment to engaging the neighbors and continuing to engage the neighbors as this whole area builds out really matters. So those are some of the reasons that I'm going to be supporting this tonight.
Thank you very much. I'll speak to the motion. I intend to vote in favor. I think the need is obvious for residential. The need for low-level retail for the neighborhood, for people to walk, has been well explained, well stated. What is, I think, also, though, critical are the expectations of the neighbors to the east. And although one can certainly be sympathetic, the fact that there's going to be roughly 150-foot separation with fencing is very important in my mind. Also, just the history here. The houses to the east were developed in 2002 for the most part. The West End plan came out in 2001 after 2 years of very intensive discussion. The West End plan has lots of discussion about the need for higher density development, for these kind of mixed use development. This community has always put commercial on arterials. It was an arterial then, it's an arterial now. So they took a risk at that time in 2001, and this is, I think, in a relatively attractive level of commercial and residential. So I'm okay with that expectation question. So with that, Councilmember Triki.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Density. That's what it boils down to right now, is density. Billings has hit the planet. Actually, the planet passed 8 billion people last week. The number of people that we have on the planet that we have to find homes for has changed dramatically over the last few years. The person who started the whole suburban movement was Herbert Hoover. And it was honestly in response to the fact that, like, we couldn't afford to give away a quarter of a section or even 40 acres to everybody in the United States at that time. That was 100 years ago. Since then, we have seen just an explosion of that type of housing. one house on one lot. It's great. I wish we could afford to do it. I wish we could make it happen and work for everybody, but we can't. That time is gone. What we now have to do is look very closely at the economics of these land deals. And the economics of this deal across the board is sitting there and saying it's going to make it safer, it's going to make it less needy on long-distance transportation. We've heard lots of different arguments along these lines here tonight. What you're really being asked to choose on here is aesthetics versus economics. And while I would like to vote for the aesthetics on this, I can't. I have to vote for the economics. The last real point that I want to make about this is that I think the most important thing we need to be thinking about here tonight is what are we telling other developers for the rest of our infill and open lots inside the city? If we say, no, I want low density housing in those areas, we are dooming future generations of people living here to higher costs of moving around, to higher costs of where they live at, and on and on and on. So I think it is almost a moral imperative, frankly, that we bite the bullet and say yes to more density. I'm sorry. The world has changed.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember, are we done? Councilmember Gillick, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is a tough one because this area is developing. I'd hate to see a stop to that, what's going in there. And Scott, by the way, just to let you know, I understand traffic studies. Maybe early on I asked, but you won't hear me asking about traffic studies. I brought it up only because you said you'd already done it. So I understand that our staff does a great job after it's done to make sure traffic is mitigated in some way. So, but this is, you know, as I stated, my concern was, you know, the area, what this could do, and on the, you know, building right next to the line, that's potentially could be done, you know, 5 foot off the property line and 54 feet up. And to me, when we think about this, we have a housing crisis now. That's going to pass. You know, 50 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 5 years from now, it's going to pass, and we'll have changed this zone to the ability to have something done, you know, 5 foot off the property line. That's the concerning thing I have. If what I heard tonight could be in the zone as far as what the developer said they would build, how they would build it, and that would retain the entire way, I think I could support this, because I think that there's a lot of good things that he wants to do to build a good development that really has, like you say, what we all want, some more open green space. It doesn't affect the corridor that much as far as height and things like that. So this is a tough one for me, and so I really feel that we have to look at what we're doing for the future on this, and so we'll see how we do on the vote.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Gillick.
Thank you, Mayor, I guess the other one thing I'm having a challenge with is yes, there was a valid protest, but we don't see the people who signed the petition here tonight. Like, how seriously, it's very easy to just sign something casually, but it has a huge impact on how this property is developed and the future of our city. And I find it just disappointing that it's not really taken seriously enough that they'd even come to a council meeting and provide comment. So just an aside.
Okay, thank you. I think we've heard from everybody, but Councilor Perrin and Councilor Rupsis.
You know, I would like to just address that real quickly, because we have had a massive room of people that have come protesting something that council approves, and it's been vice versa. I think at least the 3 gals that I saw that were at the zoning commission meeting, you know, I think they presented their case well. And, you know, at this point, my decision is not really based on that protest. It honestly is not, because, you know, I guess it was an HOA kind of protest against it. But my biggest thing is the character of the neighborhood. And I do appreciate all that has gone into the development of that, and I think everyone knows that I am very pro-business, pro-development. I worked really hard during the recode to go through all of that with a lot of the developers and builders, so I'm very much pro doing business in Billings. My issue is the extent of what this zone change would put in there. And I guess that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Are we prepared to vote, council, or anybody who hasn't addressed? Okay, looks like we'll go to a vote then. We'll do a show of hands. The motion is for approval, so the first vote will be for those in favor of approval, consistent with the staff recommendation for item number 2, zone change 1019. So if in favor of the motion for approval, please raise your hand, including Council Member Owen with her little yellow hand. So voting in favor are Council Members Shaw, Gulick, Joy, Cole, Chariki, and Councilmember Owen. If voting in opposition, raise your hand. Voting in opposition are Councilmembers Neese, Tidswell, Boyette, and Rupsis. So the motion fails because 2/3 vote was required, which would have been 8 council members, and we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voting in opposition and 6 in favor. So the motion fails. With that, I think that's a conclusion of item number 2, and we go to item number 3. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody who came to address that item. Denise, would you read item number 3?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance amending section 10-202, Billings, Montana City Code, BMCC, creating a second municipal court judge office. Staff recommends approval.
Okay, our presenter tonight is City Attorney Gina Dahl. Gina.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Caught me by surprise because I don't usually present to you, so I forgot that I was on the agenda tonight. This is, you all expected this to come. This is the code amendment for, to add the second office of municipal court judge. I don't have any slides for you tonight because this is a pretty straightforward and basic presentation, but I do have I'm going to have Kevin put up the slide or just the section of code that shows the amendments that are being made, which is also in your packet. You have that in front of you. But as you know, Billings City Code currently provides for only one elected office of municipal court judge. It currently provides for a part-time municipal court judge position. That position is appointed by the municipal court judge. However, in 2021, the legislators passed Senate Bill 127, which eliminated the ability of the municipal court judge to appoint a part-time assistant judge. That bill was passed April 21, but became effective this April. So as of April of this year, the municipal court could no longer employ a part-time assistant judge. So in order to have a second judge in Billings, our city code needs to be amended, section 10-202, which is up in front of you on the slide. That needs to be amended to provide for a second elected position. The amendments are pretty straightforward, just changes from 1 to 2 full-time elected judges, provides that the terms shall be staggered, and provides that the council may change the number of full-time judges in the future if necessary by ordinance. It also provides for the appointment of a chief judge, the 2 judges. That's set by statute. They decide between them who the chief judge would be. Additionally, section 10-205, which discusses the annual salary of the municipal court judge, that just eliminates the phrase that says the salary of the municipal court judges and any part-time assistant judge. Part-time assistant judges deleted from there, and then just another small error, or another small edit in subsection B. That is the extent of the amendments, and just as a reminder for you all, I'm sure you all are aware of this because we've had some discussions in passing or even in work sessions about the election for the municipal court judge. The next opportunity is next year. Our charter requires all city officials be elected as provided in state law. State law requires municipally elected officials, I'm having a hard time speaking tonight, though they all must be elected in odd numbered years. So we could not have the election this year. It will occur next year, so we need to have this amendment done prior to opening of nominations for the position, which starts in April. I think it's April 20th. So we have plenty of time to get this done, but we just want to get this done before the end of the year, so that there's sufficient time for potential candidates to look at this and decide if they want to put their hat in the ring for municipal court judge. So I would ask council to hold a public hearing on this matter and pass first reading of the ordinance creating the second office of municipal court judge.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions for Gina? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have several questions. First of all, I guess, once this is done, does this mean the city can no longer have a part-time judge? So if something happens to one of our current judges, we have to just go out for an election and wait and be kind of short judged until we get an...
Yes, whether you, yes, Mayor and Councilmember Neese, whether council passes this amendment or not, there is no longer the authority to hire a part-time assistant judge. So yes, you're correct. There's always the option under the law for, and is contained in our code, that the municipal court judge can appoint a judge pro tem to act on her behalf if she is unable to act, or if she is sick, or for whatever reason is unable to act. So that option still exists, but that's just that's very temporary. That's, like on a day-to-day basis, or like for a week at a time, kind of just when the judge is absolutely unavailable, that option is open. Not just a continuous appointment of a part-time assistant judge.
Is there a limit on that? Is that like an emergency appointment? Is there a limit on that? Is that what we've been doing?
Those
now?
are generally, that is generally what the criteria to appoint a judge pro tem is, yes, if the statute says if the judge is unable to act or is sick.
Unable to act. And so they leave that open as far as what unable to act would be. That's up to who?
That's not defined under law.
Who determines that? Is that something the city administrator determines, or the current judge?
The judge is the one who makes that determination.
Oh, okay. Mayor, I do have another question. This doesn't, we're going to have now two full-time judges whether we need them or not, and I think right now we need them, but if we were to get public safety in hand a little bit and things slow down, we're still going to have two full-time judges. Is there anything in this ordinance that we should change or amend to or include that would then provide night court and or weekend court to where we actually include that in the ordinance, that's part of the duties they would perform, a night court or a weekend court?
I don't think it would be, it wouldn't be necessary. I mean, I think that's something that we could explore. It might be better suited for discussion at a work session, but it wouldn't be required because a judge could hold those kinds of sessions. It wouldn't have to be required. Generally, a court is in charge of their own docket and can determine and decide when those court hearings, when they're going to hold court.
Okay, so we could either let it up to the judge to do that, and if either wouldn't get done or may get done, or we as a council could have a policy to set that policy in place, and the judges would have to fulfill that role. Is that?
I I'm gonna say I think so at this point.
Okay.
I would like to do a little bit of research on that to see if this council could actually require court to be held at a certain time. There is statutory requirements that court be open at a minimum from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. So that already exists, but there is no statutory requirement that it be held beyond that. And I would want to just do a little bit of research to make sure that you all as a body have the authority to do that.
Okay. And Mayor, one last question I
Okay.
have. Thank you for indulging me.
That's okay.
So I don't know about the rest of you, but I was contacted here, just a message today about Judge Kohler asking about her salary, and I guess that's coming up lately. So I got to thinking about that and looked at this section 10205, section B. In addition, like you made the change there, in addition to the foregoing, municipal court judge shall receive his or her actual necessary traveling expenses and all other necessary expenses as budgeted by the city's annual budget. Who determines what those actual necessary expenses are? Does that go through to Andy and he says, yeah, that checks off, that travel expense was necessary, or this expense for internet in the home or places like that, is that necessary for her performing her duty? Is that something, who determines what's necessary or not?
Well, that's another good question. There isn't any statutory authority for that. That defines that, or any case law that defines that. So generally that is left up to the court. That is generally left up to the municipal court judge to make those requests. And I think in discussion with finance and city administration, that could be determined if those were necessary expenses. Because like I said, there is no quick and easy definitions provided anywhere for that.
Okay.
It's basically, we have to rely on a judge telling us, this is what I need to do my job.
Okay, thank you. And I think, Chris, once that salary discussion comes up, one of the things I want to see is what are we expensing? What are these necessary expenses we're expensing in addition to the salary that we're talking about? So when that discussion happens to arise.
Okay,
Thanks.
that's right. Thank you. I saw a hand up down here. Councilmember Tisdale and Councilmember Purington.
Do you know what the current caseload looks like for our municipal judge right now?
I don't have those numbers right now, no.
Please.
I know, sorry, how do we determine that right now?
Right now, that's gonna come before you on December 19th, I believe.
Okay.
So I can have more specifics for you then, but we have a resolution right now that council has passed. It's a 06 resolution, which sets the municipal court judge's salary at a certain percentage of district court judge's salary.
Do we know what that percentage is?
Well, the current resolution sets it's at a tiered level. A first term judge is 80%, a second term judge is 85%, a third or subsequent term judge is 90%. And so our current judge is at a 90% of a district court judge's salary.
District court judges. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. Some of my questions are kind of along the same line, because I think there's so much of this that is just, to me, out there. It's so nebulous, we don't know.
Right.
And they're asking us to approve something, because when you go back to the one about expenses, if I could get back up there, it's saying that must be fixed by ordinance, the salary is fixed by ordinance or resolution. So we have an ordinance that's telling us that we've either fixed it this way or that way. What's the difference between the ordinance and the resolution in fixing a salary?
Councilmember Purington, I'm not sure I understand your question. What's required is that this council must set a municipal court judge's salary, and it can do so by ordinance or it can do so by resolution.
That's my question. What's the difference? Why would we set it one way over the other way?
Okay, well, essentially procedurally, it's easier to fix a salary by resolution if you need to make changes or adjustments.
Then why don't we include that in there instead of giving it an either or? why don't we say it must be fixed by a resolution because it's easier? Well, we wouldn't say it because it's easier, but
If council wishes to make that adjustment to this, it can. This is just drafted to give council the option. We currently do set it by resolution because you have the option to do so.
by doing it by ordinance, that means we have to have public hearings and.
And you don't, yes, you currently do not set salary by ordinance. You currently set salary by resolution. This ordinance, this code section gives you the authority to set the salary by ordinance or by resolution. So you actually set the salary by resolution.
Well, I mean, for me, because I always complain things are so wordy. I'd take out by ordinance if that's how we've been doing it, is to do it by ordinance, or by resolution, excuse me. And same thing with B, as Roy brought up, what are the necessary expenses? And with a judge being an elected official, I always go back to this, who has oversight for the judge? I guess our city administrator has oversight. I would think that oversight would actually come from council, but I don't know that. And, who says, no, you're asking too much for traveling expenses? Is that city administrator? Is that council members? That's where there's some of this stuff that's kind of, we don't know what we're actually voting on.
Well, council does not have oversight over another elected official. The municipal court judge is elected, so
Correct.
the voters essentially have oversight over the municipal court judge.
But we have, but
But
who
you
has
have oversight over the budget.
over the
Yeah.
budget?
Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Tiswell, again?
Gino, what right now links us back to the district court judge's salaries? The 90% thereof?
That's in the resolution that you'll see
Thank you.
at the next hearing, or excuse me, at the next meeting.
Okay.
I'll be presenting this salary resolution.
Right, there are 8 district court judges,
There are 8 district court judges.
municipal court judge,
Yes,
right now.
yes.
Boy, that caseload has to be astronomical comparatively.
Yes, our municipal court has a very, very, very high caseload, high volume.
Comparatively to the district court judge, correct?
Well, yes, I don't think, I don't know the numbers, but we have a lot of, municipal court handles traffic and all kinds of misdemeanors as well as ordinance violations, municipal infractions, those kinds of things. So yeah, it is a very high volume. A lot of things maybe don't take a lot of time, but there's a ton of cases flowing through her court.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, before we come back to Councilmember Tidswell, or to Councilmember Purington, anybody who has not asked questions? Councilmember Treaky.
Isn't what we're doing tonight enacting an ordinance in order to do what we promised the public we'd do in the public safety mill levy and add another judge to the court system?
Yes, Councilmember Tariki, we did present during the public safety mill levy presentations during the public education process that part of those funds would be allocated to a second municipal court judge and funding the court staff.
So, as I read it, the only substantive change I saw was the number 1 to 2, and everything else really just looked like
That's
trying
correct.
to clean up the code.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, before we go to a public hearing, anything further? Councilmember Purington, you had something?
I had that the caseload for district judges is there were 10,000 filings for district court judge, which is about 1,200 per judge. And in municipal court, city court, there's 15,000 plus filings. So that means even with the second judge, you've got almost 8,000 per
4 times the
judge.
district.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I know that the cases are a lot different. The question that I had too was that you said that the pro tem is appointed by the judge, but it's for a very short period of time. And it's my understanding that we kind of have an ongoing pro tem. I don't know if it's the same person, but can they keep having a pro tem?
It's my understanding the municipal court judge does routinely employ judge pro tems on a pretty routine basis.
Where does that money come from to hire that pro tem?
I cannot speak to that.
Councilmember Parrington, Mayor and Council, and the budget. I mean, we've had, since prior to my time, we did not have a second full-time judge, obviously, but there was more resources there than just running one court full-time.
Where does the money come from to pay?
It's in the budget that you adopt and the budget that's proposed annually by the court. And ultimately, it's part of our general fund expenditures.
So is there a maximum on that? I mean, when the money runs out, it runs out?
Well, they have a budget like every other division and department in the organization, and they're, expected to live and follow all the rules every other department and division do.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to a public hearing. Final things, Councilmember needs something finally, quickly?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I guess, Chris, I'm at Section B. I'm wondering why that's even in there, because any department, if they have expenses for the department, are going to go to the department head and they're going to submit an expense and get it reimbursed. So why would we even include something like this in an ordinance? Because isn't that just standard business practices that when you have an expense for your department, that you have to pay something out of your own pocket, that the city would reimburse that?
Councilmember Neese, Mayor and Council, yeah, I wouldn't, what I would rely on is it a legitimate expense? Obviously, if it's in the ordinance, it doesn't have to be an ordinance form in order for me to authorize an expenditure that's a legitimate city expense across the organization.
Right, and since we already, whatever the expense has to be within the budget, which we already do, so to me, this seems like it's a completely redundant paragraph that wouldn't even need to be there, because we already look at the budget and we approve the budget, and if there's an expense, it's going to go to Andy for reimbursement, and it has to have been a legitimate expense anyway for it to be reimbursed. So is there any reason why we would not just strike that entire paragraph?
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese, that, you're referring to section 10-205 sub B, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That, I wouldn't disagree with you, that it doesn't necessarily need to be in code. It's just been there forever. It's statute, that's a statute as well. So this is just a reiteration of statutory law requirements.
Okay.
So you have to reimburse a court for necessary expenses. So whether that's there or not, that's the law.
Okay, so that's just word for word out of the law. That's why it's in
basically.
there. Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Yep.
Okay, council, let's go to a public hearing on item number 3. If anybody would like to comment on the ordinance authorizing the election of a second full-time municipal judge, please come forward at this time. Is there any public comment on item number 3? And there is no one online. And so we'll close the public hearing and look to council. Councilmember Tidswell.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the first reading ordinance amending section 10-202 BMCC, creating a second municipal court judge office as recommended by staff.
Councilmember Boyette is indicating a second to that motion. Motion is for approval. Discussion on the motion. And Councilmember Owen, you do not have your hand up, but I didn't want to close you out in case you had either questions or comments.
Sorry, Mayor, I just couldn't get to my buttons fast enough, but I don't. I'm good, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Parrington.
Well, I don't have it in front of me, but I would like to make an amendment to that section, that down here. And where it reads, oh, come on. Anyway. On 10-205, Section A, pursuant to MCA 3-6-203, the salary of the municipal court judge may be fixed by resolution.
Oh, okay,
Or
so.
can we do that because it's part of the MCA? Is it part of the MCA? I just pulled that up and.
Councilmember Parrington, that is provided in state law, but if you wanted to require that council fix the salary by resolution, I think you can do that. The way it's written just provides you the option. So if you want to require it to be done by resolution, you can make that amendment.
The other portion to that MCA is that it's payable monthly by the city treasurer. We do not have that in ours. Do we not need that? Are they not paid monthly?
No, I don't think you need that, but you certainly can add that as well.
Well, I would just say must be set by resolution. And I don't know if they get paid monthly or bi-monthly, I don't know.
Okay, so the motion is a motion to amend the underlying motion to modify section 10-205 subparagraph A to delete the words ordinance or, so it would only read that it must be fixed by resolution. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, Councilmember Tidswell makes the second. Discussion on the motion? Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I don't see any reason to strike the word ordinance. Part of the reason why we're rewriting, editing, changing part of this ordinance is because the state, through the legislature, changed what it wanted to do. I don't see any reason to go more strict or more confined from what state law allows us to do. In the future, it may be that it has to be set by by an ordinance, and we'll be flipping it back over. If state law gives us that and we usually put state law into our ordinances for the fact that it gives us that power. So I don't see any reason to confine that or restrict that to a resolution. If we have that power in the future, or an ordinance might be necessary, and then we go through another edit. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Tidswell, you had the second. We'll just try to get this wrapped up and vote and get this done before we break.
If what she's saying is the case, then do we not directly quote the state statute? Do we not directly quote what's on anything? Yeah. Yeah. We're not directly quoting that, but to what Ms. Joy just said, should we not be directly quoting that? Well, Chris, don't turn your eyes away from me.
Here's our attorney.
Councilmember Tiswell, I guess I'm not exactly sure that I understand your question, but you don't have to, you certainly don't have to incorporate all of Montana code into your city code. But like I said, if you want to limit this to fixing the salary by resolution, you can do that. The statute just provides you the option of doing it by ordinance or resolution, and we've just preserved that in your city code. But if you want to eliminate that option, that's certainly within your authority to do.
You feel we're covered then?
If you leave it as is,
Yeah.
you're covered with the options, yes. If you want to take out ordinance, then you will be required to always set it by resolution, which likely would never be an issue because that's the way it's been done.
Okay, Councilor, we're prepared to vote on the proposed amendment. Okay, so again, it's to delete those words ordinance or. If in favor of the amendment to the underlying motion, raise your hand. Voting in favor of the proposed amendment are Councilmembers Gulick, Neese, Tidswell, and Parrington. Voting in opposition, raise your hand. Councilmembers Shaw, Joy, Cole, Tricky, Boyette, and Rupsis. I think the amendment fails, brings us back to the under. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Owen. How did Councilmember Owen vote?
In the affirmative.
For the amendment.
She's saying no.
Yes.
She's saying no. She's right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Owen, did you vote in opposition to the proposed amendment?
I voted for Councilmember Parrington's amendment.
Okay. So I didn't get the count. Was it 6-5? 6-5 against? 5 in, correct? 5 in favor?
5 in favor,
Yes,
6
okay.
against.
Motion fails. So brings us back to the underlying motion. Councilor, we're ready to vote on the underlying motion. Okay, so if in favor of the underlying motion for approval with the original language, please say aye.
Aye.
If in opposition, please, and Councilmember Owen votes in favor as well. If in opposition, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes item number 3. Thank you. Brings us to 7:30 and item number 4. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back as close to 7:35 as we can. That's 6 minutes from now. Welcome back. So we left off with item number 4. Denise, if you would go ahead and read item number 4 for us, please.
Stillwater building updates, no action is required.
That was short and sweet. So our presenter tonight is Jessica. You've changed.
I shaved.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right. Well, so Kevin Iflin, Assistant City Administrator, is going to probably do a tag team, I guess, with Jessica. So we'll start off with Kevin and turn it over to you. Kevin.
Yep, thanks, Mayor and Council. What I want to do is just give you a real high overview of kind of where we're going and why we're here tonight. So some of the things that we've done and are doing still, you're going to see some numbers in here tonight, and what we've already done is taken into account some value engineering of items. As soon as we saw kind of where the budget was falling and coming in line there, we started to look at items. What could we reduce? What could we save on some costs? What could we do a little bit differently to look at some of that value engineering focus of that? So you're going to see some numbers that have already accounted for that, that Jessica and the team is going to present tonight. Also, we're currently working and have been working for a while on some identified one-time cuts for how to fund what you're going to see tonight. So keep that in mind. We don't have the details that we're ready to share with you tonight. We still need to work with our department directors and stuff, but we are looking at, okay, what type of revenue side of things can we come to you with? The other thing is the historic tax credits. We're going to touch on kind of what the debt service, but again, we don't have specific numbers of what the debt service would look like on some of these numbers tonight. And then also a couple of weeks ago that you approved some, us moving forward with sale of some city properties. We're certainly looking at accounting and putting that into this picture for the whole scope of work. So the process, why we're here tonight, normally a bid package would be on the consent agenda. We've moved it off the consent agenda. We're moving it after this presentation, and that's for bid package number 1. And we're going to explain to you why that's important and why that's still needed, no matter what type of decisions that we go forward with, from this point forward, of why that package is important, why we still need to do that. So we'll touch on that tonight, and then the actual approval of that bid package will come as I think item number 5 on the agenda. We're going to look at some build-out options and some funding options tonight a little bit. Again, not down in the weeds of exactly what those are, but kind of the general categories. What we're looking for, especially on build-out options, is are we on the right track? Did we pick the things at council? Yes, let's look at those things, so we can get some better direction on which way we need to head with the Stillwater building. The other thing that was brought up by Councilmember Owen was, should this idea, the build-out options, give you the general overview tonight, then take, more detailed conversations to the Finance and Budget Committee, and then we're going to ask for a kind of a special meeting or an earlier meeting than was originally scheduled. I believe it was originally scheduled on December 14th. We'd like to move that to December 8th to allow time to come back to council after that discussion with those build-out and funding options with a recommendation to council. And we'd like to bring that back on December 19th to City Council to have that discussion. So moving that Finance Committee meeting up a week or so would give us more time, just when the packets are due and when they have to be out to you guys, and give you more time to review that. Why is that December 19th date important? It's important because of some things we can touch on a little bit later if we need to, but that keeps us on a good bid schedule for this project if we're moving forward with trying to get the construction documents done, trying to get this out to bid. We don't want to be bidding out middle to late summer just because of, construction schedules get filled up very quickly. So even on that December 19th schedule, if council gives us some marching orders, here's what you need to go do and start doing it in this direction, that December 19th is putting us bid packages probably, mid, late March, early April, or even later in that time frame. So that's why that December 19th date is important. And with that, I think I've covered everything I needed to hit, and so I'm going to turn this over to Jessica, and we've got a whole team of people here to answer questions and to give some information tonight.
Thank you very much. Jessica.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Kevin. First, I would like to introduce the team that we have here tonight. This is a group presentation. So we have our design team here. We have Nick Lippert with JLG. We have Bill Haynes with Collaborative Design. On the contractor side, we have our Dick Anderson team here. We have Shane, who does the pre-construction, budgeting, estimating. We have AJ, who's our project manager on this project, and then we have Kevin back there with Dick Anderson. And then also John Caterino, our facilities superintendent, will be presenting a couple slides as well. So we are going to, here's the agenda. We're going to go through some project updates. Then I'll have the design team talk about project timeline, the design phase. Then John will talk about the costs and the budget estimates, and then we'll go through the options. So when we're talking about the budget estimates, we hired, as you know, we did the pre-construction contract with Dick Anderson as our construction manager at risk contract. And all the estimates that we see, our budget numbers that they put together, working with their subcontractors, working with all the resources that they have available to them to really try to get the most accurate numbers that we can come up with at this point in time. But still, they are estimated costs, and obviously things can change and fluctuate over time. So we were last in front of you formally in February. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, and we've done a lot of work on this project since then, but we have touched base over the last several months with user group meetings, a couple updates in the City Administrator's Weekly, but really we haven't been here formally to talk to you since February. So milestones that we have hit, we did that contract with Dick Anderson. We completed the schematic design in May. We did 4 rounds of user group meetings where we meet with the different departments and talk through programming of the spaces and things that they need so that they can do their work, and making sure that we are including the things we do need and not including things we don't need. The pre-selection of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection subcontractors. The National Historic Registration. The state did recommend to National Park Service in September that the building is registered on the National Historic Register. We did issue our historic tax credit RFP, and tonight in the consent agenda, you did approve the contract with the historic tax credit consultant. And Dick Anderson issued that bid package 1. That's the next item on the agenda tonight, and we'll talk about a little more. And then we also completed design development in October. So now I'll have Nick come up and he'll talk about the project timeline.
All right, got a pointer, dangerous. Again, thank you, Nick Lippert with JLG Architects. Very happy to be here tonight and give you an overall picture of where we're sitting. So project timeline of where we're sitting today. We are the red line on the chart here, but right between what we call design development and construction documents. So taking us a step back, obviously late 2021, building and design team selection happened. We moved quickly into pre-design, and what we do in the pre-design phase is really work quickly to get ourselves familiar with the building. So facility studies, get the engineers to walk through. We also start jumping headfirst into building programming, which means identifying the list of spaces that we need to include. During that process, we also started our 3D modeling for the project going forward. Schematic design, we jumped right into a round of user groups, which there's been a lot in this room that have been part of that. We're establishing those building blocks, so what a typical workspace looks like, what a typical office looks like, kind of those building blocks, how the building's coming together. And then another big milestone in that phase was selection of Dick Anderson, our construction manager partner. At the end of that, which is really important, at the end of that, we had a milestone of a schematic design estimate. So that estimate established where we are. The direction was to move forward into the next phase of design development, knowing where we're at. Between the end of schematic design and design development, what we've been doing is primarily establishing and further developing the project itself, really dialing in the details. What does the casework look like? What does the door functions operate? Things like that. But material selection, interior design, developed systems, and most importantly, this bid package number 1, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth. But what that does is it essentially starts a clock going forward of some early things that we can potentially select out of the project scope going forward. So that brings us essentially where we're at today with the design development estimate that Dick Anderson had prepared, and we've got options. Which this is an iterative process. This is something you see. We have another round of estimating and bidding that's going to be happening. But each one of these milestones allows us to adjust. And that's what we're here to talk about today is how do we need to adjust as a group and have this conversation. So if I were to take a minute to talk about going forward, again, construction documents, that's when we start talking really contractor talk. We start detailing, we really start digging into the final specifications and making sure everything is right for the document set that goes up to the contractor for a public bidding process and development of the guaranteed maximum price. So again, that public bidding process will allow subcontractors to bid to Dick Anderson, and the Dick Anderson will be able to compile those subcontractors into a package and review those, all open book, and hopefully we'll be to a point where we can, this board can approve GMP, guaranteed maximum price, to move forward into construction. Then the fun really starts. So construction, about 12 months worth of positive construction. I'd say probably a month and a half to 2 months of a little bit of negative construction to start before that, right? Some demolition within the project, within the building. And then John's team would take over for occupancy and move in and maintenance of the building going forward. So again, through that design update, the CMR pre-construction services, and feel free if there's anything I missed when I'm going through this. But City Council approved to go with the CMAR, Construction Management at Risk process. This has paid off in multiple ways so far. It's a great delivery method that we've got a lot of experience with. But Dick Anderson was pulled on to basically manage pre-construction services, which means they're there at the table when we're making design decisions. They can give guidance. Most importantly lately is we can't get our hands on XYZ, so we should look at alternatives to that, which has been very helpful. Also, through a recommendation of Dick Anderson's team, we have elected to move forward with pre-selection of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection subcontractors for pre-construction services. What that does then, again, in the same vein, they're able to bring in their specialty experience and be able to understand kind of what is staying, or help develop that scope of what is staying, what needs to go. They have a more hands-on approach to the building. So we're able to actually, in a lot of cases, have been able to save because they understand the real quality of what the equipment is in the building itself. I'll say that these are for pre-construction services. Those are things that they do for us. What they don't do for us is this doesn't mean that they necessarily have the final contract for the project, right? They still have to publicly bid that through the public bid process. You'll also notice that Osland Fire Protection is the higher of the four, primarily due because there is design services within that for fire protection, and that's very typical for project delivery methods. The fire protection would be broken out as a proprietary system generally, and that subcontractor would design that system, and that's very typical going forward. So that work can also be happening early, which is awesome and helps us a lot. Through design development, like we talked a little bit before, but within that design development package, obviously we're refining the previous information. We're really finalizing floor plans and making sure everybody that's going to be using the building has their eyes on the building and understands it really well. I have confidence that we've vetted with the outstanding of maybe a handful of things. We've vetted pretty much everything through all the departments so far. So this is the document set that has the building elevations, the RCPs, the specifications at a DD level, so it's not 100% complete, but this is the set that Dick Anderson used to establish the detailed budget estimate for design development. Also, bid package one, what this does is it's a strategy that we employ pretty frequently that actually pulls a specific piece of scope out of a project generally. Sometimes it's concrete and foundations to beat the weather, or there's specific reasons why we pay special attention as part of the project. We get it designed really quickly, and then we get that issued out early for the contractor to take and move forward. This one specifically was nearly entirely about long lead items and procurement of chiller, cooling tower, AHUs, things like that within the project. So the big gray boxes that make the building breathe and work, that are really hard to get our hands on in a timely manner. With a 12-month construction schedule, it was pushing it. So Dick Anderson identified, hey, we should move these forward. and that's what we did. Also included in this package, there's demolition scope thereof, and then also structural, so opening of the second floor, stair opening, so that demolition and steel is another part of that package itself. So that was publicly bid. Dick Anderson went through that process and brought that back. We had a chance to vet that. We had some questions and worked through the subcontractors on that, and the normal CMAR process of open book. And we are at just over 2.2 million for that bid package number 1, which is all work that would need to be done in the project no matter what. But this also starts a clock going forward that would help us time the project out to better ensure that the city is getting in their project on time. So then after bid package 1 was issued, design development was issued, we got our numbers back. If we look forward, going forward, hopefully at or about December 19th, we can get direction from this board to move forward. So we would be moving forward in construction documents. Again, talking contractor talk. We developed that design package. We worked through architectural lead design, mechanical design, electrical. This electrical is really key in this phase because we're really working through the details of making sure those lights in the right spot, making sure we don't have outlets that conflict with desks and casework. That's really a lot of the work that happens here, really in the minute details. And then obviously structural, finishing out their design overall. Most of their scope's completed so far. All right. At this point, I'll bring up John to talk a little bit about project costs so far.
Thank you, Nick. Mayor and council, good evening. So the slide that we have here shows our current costs to date, anticipated. Some of these costs have already been paid, some are under contract, and some still need approval. So the building purchase, $13.5 million, which was October of 21. Design services at $1.2 million. Those include pre-design, SD, DD, CD, historic preservation application, an FF&E study. That's primarily Nick and his team. Construction manager at risk at $18,000. That includes general conditions, budget estimating, and the guaranteed maximum price for bidding. Pre-con services, as Nick alluded to, for $53,000. Those services include subcontractor budgeting and design. Bid package 1, which Nick talked about as well, at $2.2 million. That includes selected demolition and procurement of equipment that has long lead time. And then abatement, which is the removal of asbestos-containing materials in locations that will be disturbed. So the mural in the lobby that we have to relocate, stair towers where we're cutting in doors, and then also some data rooms that are either being eliminated or being expanded. So our budget estimates, November 22, the DD budget total project cost is $43 million. That includes the building purchase, the hard costs, soft costs as well.
And Nick, could you just clarify what exactly soft cost means?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Cole. So the difference between hard and soft costs is hard would be considered anything that is secured to the structure itself or to the walls. Soft cost is everything else. So soft cost is primarily, as we have with point number 2, subpoint number 2, construction contingency for owner, professional fees, reimbursables, fixture, furniture, and equipment, technology and security such as access control, hazardous material abatement, special testings and inspections, and permitting fees.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we can see an increase in the total project estimate from our preliminary budget in September of 21, which we had at 32 million, and then at the end of SD in June of this year at 41 million. And that cost increased due to a number of things, primarily materials. And also there were some items that we didn't account for that our design team was able to illuminate for us. So we're anticipating about $204 per square foot to build out our DD scope of work. We got to that number by dividing the total estimate by the building gross floor area, which is 211,000 square feet. And just to be clear, that $204, though, is only the scope of the new construction that is contemplated, not undeveloped areas. Parts of the building would remain unfinished. Correct.
Okay.
Then we had the process to go through. We had the opportunity to go through the process of value engineering. So what this is, it's mindful and intentional process to identify areas of cost savings. So the value engineering process is one of the many benefits of having a construction manager at risk versus the low bid. The goal of VE process is to reduce costs. So we engaged with our team and analyzed the value, the function, and the costs of each item and made a cost-benefit determination as to what items could be either removed from the project scope or reduced. So some of the questions that we asked, or that were asked, was, does this item align with the project goals? What value does this item bring? What sort of issues can we anticipate if we remove an item or reduce the level of quality? Is there a product with similar quality that is less costly? And then depending on the answers, we considered if there was a suitable alternative or if the item should be removed from the project scope. So one of the big outputs of the value engineering process is that we netted an estimated savings of 1.7 million. So if we go to the previous slide, and we see that DD budget cost estimate of 43 million, that was actually higher. So we went through the value engineering process and we reduced the scope, eliminated some items, and we got to that 43 million. We saw a reduction of our construction contingency from 10% to 7%. And some of the scope reductions include exterior soffit replacement. We decided not to replace the exterior soffit due to the condition that it's in. The glass rail system for the open stairway, we were originally at $1,300 a linear foot, and we worked with the team to find a similar solution that meets the design aesthetic and is code compliant, and that came in at $600 a linear foot. We reduced the terrazzo costs, selected less costly flooring materials, reduced storefront glazing systems in offices. So the amount of storefronts have been reduced, and we're going with hollow metal doors and side lights, and laminate windowsills instead of solid surfaces. Any questions on that before I pass it back to Nick?
Why don't we try to save our questions as best we can? I may jump in if there's a real simple clarification.
Great. So one note here, so the value engineering process at that point was one that the team worked pretty diligently on to not only identify some items very early on in the project, which had been absorbed before we even got into design development, that we knew we would need to be taking going in. But these also are things that aren't going to reduce the quality, the experience, a lot of the project goals for the project. These are, I'd say, kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you were to say, right, of the project that we netted a pretty good savings, about 1.8 of just these ones that aren't, you wouldn't ever really know if we were going into the building. So, all right. So we've packaged. There's a couple different ways to do this. I'll start out that way. So one way to do this is essentially a very long list of menu items, which gets very in-depth very quickly. The other way that we found to be more fruitful to start out with is actually prepare packages, right? Some options of how we could address this project going forward, how we can approach it. So we've prepared 4 options. Each has their merits and has the issues going forward. And I think you'll see it starts getting to the kind of value of what the project's really going to be delivering versus the dollars that's going to be requiring going forward. So start out with build out option number 1, the complete project. So this is essentially everything minus the VE options that were pulled out. This is something that is basically as what's drawn on paper today going forward. So it maintains the project design intent and level of quality. It includes all major functions as programmed. So things like council space and courtroom. I mean, It's everything that the city would need to be performing going forward. Like I said, the items value engineered have been removed, and again, maintains about 38,000 square feet of leasable space within the project itself. So it'd be shelled or white box space for the leasers to come in. So that total build-out square footage, so the actual square footage that we're touching, so John referenced about a 211 gross square footage across the entirety of the complex. This is the square footage that we're actually touching, would be about 126,000 square feet. So that total project budget about 43,231. So some of the pros in this one, and obviously, as you can imagine, aligns best with the guiding principles and direction given to city staff. Those are the guiding principles that got us to that package. Ultimately, those are the lenses we were making decisions based on. It co-locates city departments and solves for facility space deficiencies. It vacates current city hall and allows for a future property sale. Realizes economy of scale versus a phased out build out. We say phase build out, there likely will be still kind of like mini phases within the normal schedule, just kind of how the building's approached. But this wouldn't be like extended phases where there'd be a demobilization or remobilization. Cons, obviously it's requiring additional funding resources in addition to what's been budgeted, and therefore may pull resources from other city projects and needs. We've tried to reference and kind of gauge each one of these against kind of the 5 goals that have been outstretched for the project itself in the very beginning. So resiliency, a 50-year solution for city services. This seems to be the best alignment with the 50-year solution. It's something that does bring you guys up to a point, not only within your departments, but within the community, that this project be a long-running project for you. Co-locating city offices, it enhances the collaboration, obviously getting everybody over. Community expectation, City Hall, it has everything a community would expect City Hall and what a City Hall would do for the community itself. Fiscal responsibility, again, this one is the most costly, so it wouldn't be getting 100 out of 100, but it would be, it does have some merits as far as a value of this dollar per square foot going forward. And then obviously user experience, this has the best because it does have everybody under one roof. Option 2, reduced build out. This would be, the strategy here with this one would be prioritizing getting all the departments over to the new facility, but pulls out some non-essential spaces to the function of the city. So some of those spaces that we talked about that maybe don't need to go in day one and maybe can be used, we could use some different strategies outside of this project to accommodate. Number 1 would be do not build out council chambers. Primarily, it's a more expensive space within the building. But it's also one that could be potentially delayed in the future with pretty minimal impact to the project, something that could be coming and done late at a later date. Option 2, do not build out a single or one of the courtrooms, which given the previous motion, I'm not sure if it's in the plan anymore. But again, same thing. It's a heavy tech room. It's got some pretty high costs there, so we were able to potentially pull some costs out of the project by delaying that construction. Security controls only on the elevators, so the elevators would functionally work how the building would require them to be as far as security up and down, right? Being able to lock a car out so the car could go up and down, but we'd have some pretty minimal repairs to the interior versus the original project, which has new car interiors and doors. We'd potentially reuse the 4th floor lobby, which it's in good condition now, however, it wouldn't match the new aesthetic going forward. This one fundamentally would not be replacing one of the chillers, which would mean you would only have one functional chiller in the facility, so that really cuts down on redundancy. A typical project like this would have the 2 chiller for redundancy. Do not build out the EOC, that could be deferred for future, Emergency Operations Center. And then therefore we would not need to update the generator plant. So the generator plant could be rehabbed, but it would not be able to back up the entirety of the project like the option 1 would. And we'd be prioritizing spaces like the police department, things like that to make sure that they can stay up. So with that scope, build out square footage is just over 115,000. And the total project budget for that one is about 41.4. Pros, allow city staff to be co-located, so the functional city staff coming over still works. It does have less upfront cost. It vacates current city hall. Those are great things about this plan. Yeah, it would eliminate the need for the leases across the city. This would require in-depth construction while the city is occupied. So in the decision was made, hey, we do have a new judge coming on. We need to get that courtroom done, or council chambers, we finally need to do it. We can't share space throughout the community for the council. That would need to go on while the facility is occupied. So functionally, we've got some hiccups there. Requires additional funding sources. Construction later will be more costly. Does not provide redundancy for the main cooling system, and does not provide full building emergency backup like option 1 would. And then this would likely and potentially start creating some scheduling issues, or similar to how it's operating today, of making sure you're working through schedules between court and council, or potentially other spaces throughout the community. Project goals and objectives, again, this starts pulling back on that. Resiliency, it doesn't necessarily become the 50-year solution for city services, primarily because it doesn't have everything we initially set out to do in the project. Co-locating city offices, it does all that. All that collaboration still happens. Community expectation in City Hall is starting to see some movement backwards, primarily because some of those community spaces that would be expected in City Hall aren't there. Fiscal responsibility, again, it's less expensive, the dollar per square foot, the value is still there, but it's starting to pull back. And of course, that user experience gets pulled back a little bit, driven primarily because of the functions that aren't within the facility. All right, option 3. So these ones started looking at, okay, really, how can we get exactly what we are absolutely need to do today, and what can we really start putting out? So we started really putting our thinking caps. So what is actual feasible packages we could put forward? Put these in 2 different frames of reference. Number 1 is we need a priority maybe to vacate the current City Hall. That's the bottom line, because that could potentially bring us more revenue in, so on and so forth. So what this would do would pull all the departments out of existing City Hall, but we wouldn't pull over the departments that have currently leased space that are not in City Hall. So for example, planning, building, engineering, code compliance, community development, parks. We'd build out the lobbies. We would still not build out the council chambers or 1 courtroom. This drops our build out square footage to just under 100,000 for a total project of about 39.5. So vacates current City Hall and allows for property sale, less upfront costs. But just like we saw in the last slide, a lot of those cons are the same thing, but to a larger degree, right? More square footage that's not bringing over day 1. So that starts really impacting our project goals and objectives. Our resiliency really starts dropping down. Our co-locating city offices, essentially you're operating as you are today. You're just moving City Hall over. The community expectation of City Hall would be, we wouldn't be necessarily hitting those. Fiscal responsibility, again, it's less expensive. However, it's likely going to be more cost in the end run when it's all built out, and that user experience gets a pretty large hit. Now, build out 4, we really started looking at, okay, if like bottom line, how efficient could we make this project going forward? And if it really came down to brass tacks, it became a law and justice center, right? It became we prioritize those departments that are functional for that. So courts, police, legal. We would be building out lobbies on 1st, 2nd, and 4th, but the remainder of, say, 1st floor and 5th floor would be shelved, something that we just put on the shelf for future use. The build out square footage of that is about 67,000, and this has the least costly option, about 35.5. So obviously it has the least upfront cost, and it solves the space issues for courts, legal, and police. However, as we study this option more, it may start creating more space issues by potentially maybe backfilling into City Hall with other departments, getting them out of leases. It starts just kind of moving people around. There's potentially more renovations needed at this facility, and is that dollars that you really want to spend? So those are considerations we need to move forward. And then again, the cons, I think the only additional one that we say from before would be, it really becomes a courthouse and police department, and not really City Hall. It becomes a law enforcement center is what we typically call a facility like this, and not necessarily City Hall function itself, just because of the lack of City Hall's functions within it. And again, as you can imagine, the project goals and objectives, we start really hitting all the way down, really pull back. It really is not really accomplishing anything from our project goals, with potentially the most fiscally inexpensive upfront, but probably the most expensive when we start talking longest road, complete build out. All right, 4 options. Want to talk a little bit about this one, AJ? So we wanted to give a little bit of reference about deferred construction project impacts. So potentially, what are those things that, from a contractor perspective, what does it mean to potentially delay work within a project and come back after the fact to complete that?
AJ Harmon with Dick Anderson Construction. Excited to be here and part of the team, so thank you for your time. So some of the things we run into with the deferred construction costs, it's just money that you're spending up front and you're gonna end up having to do twice. Some of our setting up site security, setting up fences, all of our equipment, our fuels, things like that, what we call general conditions for just building construction. We'll be remobilizing, so we'll essentially be seeing some of those twice as we start to break out the project into phases where we're demobilizing and coming back. We also start running into the risk of inflation. It's been pretty crazy since 2019. It has slowed down, but it is unpredictable too. We don't anticipate anything to go back to what it was. It's leveled out a little bit, which means it's just quit jumping at extreme rates for us. So we lose a lot of efficiencies too, and a lot of your square foot cost of the construction of the overall building really start to increase when you add all those factors back in. So that's one last issue, or one last thing we run into when we separated is the impact of the groups that have moved into the building. Then we come back and we do our best not to, but you do interrupt the day-to-day operations of the building when you introduce a construction project to it. So if you move certain groups in, we will have a little bit of an impact on them when we come back to do more phases of the project. So. Thank you.
All right, and then just talking from internal operations, from a city's perspective in terms of deferring the construction, it really does create increased workload and duration for the building services department. We'd have to manage and staff 2 buildings. So if we have City Hall still operational and then we're moving people over to the Stillwater, our O&M charges and salary would just go up based on the staffing that we would need for the 2 buildings. Also looking at borrowing costs. If the city were to borrow funds for this project, those costs would increase over a phased project. And then also just coming up with a plan if portions are deferred. So we have spent time considering financial, personnel, operation issues if we do defer part of the construction. So again, as Kevin said, part of the project, or part of the presentation tonight is just having that discussion, and are we on the right track, and what track, does council want us to go down, and then we need to start answering some of these questions. So thinking of funding options, so we know we're over budget, right? That's pretty clear. We have talked about the 16.1 million that is in general fund and ARPA funds that have currently been earmarked for this project. So when we try to make up that difference, we're looking at identifying one-time budget cuts and reallocating funds from other accounts to fund this capital project. It'd be a one-time cost. We do have the historic tax credits that we've not accounted for any funding from that at this point. As I said, we will just get under contract with our consultant based on the approval tonight on that contract. And then we'll start working with them and seeing how we can identify qualifying expenses and applying for or working through the process to realize funding from the historic tax credit process. Then we also have the option of charging some costs to individual non-general fund departments. So as Kevin said, those are discussions we'd have to have with directors and different departments on what those funds would look like, what those charges would look like. There's also the option of debt service with lease financing. That's similar to how the Billings Operations Center was funded. The facilities division basically takes out the debt as the landlord and then charges leases to their tenants, which are city departments. So we would have to look at how that option could work with the new City Hall project. And then we also have the potential sale of properties, including this building, the Park One retail space, the surface lots along 27th. And then lastly, we have leasing spaces to tenants. So not including the county space, we will have about 38,000 square feet of leasable space if we do the entire planned build out. So in that case, we could get revenue from leases to other organizations. So action items, things that we're looking for discussion and direction. First, we do have the approval of bid package 1 tonight, or the vote on it if you wish to approve it and move forward with that portion of the project. We would like this to be a discussion about those 4 build-out options that Nick presented, discussion on the funding options and what is the direction that you'd like to see us take or like to see us explore. Would you like this to go to the Council Budget Committee for review? If so, could we move that meeting up to the 8th as Kevin discussed? And then lastly, that council direction at the December 19th council meeting and what recommendation that staff would have or the budget committee would have. And with that, that concludes the presentation and we are open for questions.
Okay, very good. We're going to have lots of them. So thank you. Council, just so that we have some order to this, why don't we just move down through the down the table. We've started, I think, last week at the number 1, so we won't do that again this time. Why don't we start out at this end, Ward 5, and we'll move this direction this time. So just ask that you keep have a question or two, and then once we get through, if we're still have questions, we'll go back a second round. Just identify who you'd like to answer the question, especially if it's not Jessica. We'll assume it's Jessica unless said otherwise.
Thanks, Mayor. So I guess this is a question for Andy. But as best you can, I think for me, the funding options, the only one that really seems to be sticking out to me is the debt service with lease financing and finding out more about how that works. I can't see, I mean, I'm glad you didn't put any GO bonds on here, going out to the voters or anything, but to me, it's very disappointing that we basically used all our COVID and ARPA funds for this without building something for the community, or really even discussing that. And here we are now 50% over where we were. It's very frustrating. So hopefully, if you don't have it tonight, more information on the lease financing option. To me, that seems like the best option out there.
So Mayor, Council, I think it would be helpful to just go back to kind of the first slide and some of the primary purpose of tonight. Absolutely, all detail and refinement of the financial components, what cuts we're recommending as a staff, what financing options are, will be in detail for you to make an informed decision on the 19th. Tonight, we really want to find out, are we looking at the right kind of buckets or sets of options in this? And I would encourage you to please not take off the table. All but 2 of those options is quite painful. I forget the slide that was prior, and that is it's not painful to get tax credits, provided we're eligible for them. Everything else is going to come with a consequence, but please don't take off the table short-term consequences to do a project of this magnitude. So I am asking all department heads, say, what can we eliminate in this current year's budget that we wanted to get done, but that this project is more important than, and no, none of us wanted to see inflation go up the way it has over the past 18 months. So, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Ripsis, you sort of directed that to Andy. Andy's not here.
Yeah, I know.
But so you're just sort of highlighting it for Chris to
dig into that a bit.
Kevin, can you put up the funding option slide? Yeah.
Did you want even
Yeah,
a basic
just,
explanation from?
Okay, there we go. So if I can just comment, Councilmember Rupsis. So the other thing when we're looking at the budget is we're assuming worst case scenario. We're assuming we have no tenants. We're assuming we don't sell City Hall. We're assuming we don't get tax credits. So I think we have a lot of these possibilities, but we don't want to come to you with, hey, this could happen. So we are trying to take the most conservative route of saying worst case scenario, we're funding this entirely. You know, here's what would have to happen. When we look at the lease financing, it is just that. It's looking at what can the tenants pay on and Andy did run the numbers for us to say, over a 20-year period, here's what your annual, it was right around $1 million a year of what our debt service would be. So operationally, how do we find $1 million a year from these departments? Right now, I think our City Hall charges are in the $500,000 range is what facilities charges our City Hall tenants right now. So we obviously would have to make up the difference because we would have O&M costs still in the new facility, and then we'd have $1 million debt service that we'd have to charge our tenants if we didn't have any outside organizations that had leases with us.
And just if I can ask you just to clarify what you just said, the $1 million debt service is based on the assumption of borrowing how much?
$11 million.
Okay, for the
20
entire
years.
deficit. So it's really a worst case scenario. Assumes no historic tax credits, assumes no sale of businesses, assumes no cuts from other departments, no nickels and dimes in the sofa at all. Okay, so about $11 million principal. Okay, thank you. Back to Councilmember Ripsis, and we'll move to Councilmember Boyette.
The only other thing I'd add is I understand it's been a long-stated goal to co-locate as much as you can for efficiencies, but in this day and age, it seems to be the only organization I can hear of right now that is dead set on co-location as finding opportunities for efficiencies. So I think the world in general is getting better at working remotely, and we should be not necessarily tied to that as a goal. So if there are ways to trim this out or adjust our goals, that to me seems to be one of the flexible options out there, a flexible goal anyway. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just thinking, we don't need even to be here. We could be at the library right now, so the council doesn't matter for a room, I was thinking. But, with borrowing money, we borrowed TIF money for the evidence. Could we, that's an option. I'm just wondering, throwing that out. The tax credit, how long does it take to get a tax credit? We're not going to get that overnight. Leasing properties. I like the idea if we go to the budget group and just kind of beat this out with a cup of coffee rather than sit here tonight and go, well, I think this and they think that and he thinks that. That's not going to work. I was thinking there might have been another option, and I was talking to Kevin about it. Kevin, here's $16.1 million. What can you do with that? Versus saying this is what you guys think we should be doing. Maybe we don't, like Tom said, maybe we don't need to put everybody in one pocket, but I like the idea of going to the budget committee with some ideas like this. That's a good place to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Pearson.
Thank you. I think this really shows us the options that we have. And I'm going to go along with Tom as far as I know that you're doing this conservatively, but it would be interesting if God answered all of our prayers and we got every one of those, we might just be looking really pretty here. But that may not happen. So I would like it to go back to the Budget Committee, but one of the things that we have said, at least among ourselves from time to time, is we don't know what the other departments are looking at. I think initially we got that one layout that, and we're sitting there going, oh, well, they're doing that. Well, we don't think they need that much, or maybe they need this over here. Because in the end, the council does approve that budget for this. So I'm hoping that if it does go back to the Budget Committee, that they will look at the different departments as well. I guess I'm asking the Budget Committee, is that the goal, to see what those needs are? And I appreciate the fact that you're saying, I've told the budget or the department heads, where can you cut or not have it as nice? Because there's sometimes that, all we do when we go to our meetings, that we look at the council chambers, and I'm just going, gee, I don't care if you have a door on it or not, or a lock on it. There's a lot of things that I'm just going, we're getting into too fine of detail, and all those details cost money. So I'd really like to see the Budget Committee look at the other departments, not just city council. So that's my comment, question,
Okay.
or whatever.
Thank you, Councilmember Tidswell.
I'm good, thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Tricky.
Excuse me. So the line, debt service with lease financing, does the definition of lease financing include the money that other departments are contributing to it?
Yes, yep, that's correct. So that was the funding mechanism for the Billings Operations Center, was that all the other departments that are out there, police department, public works, parks, fleet, they're paying facilities as the landlord, and we're paying down that debt service.
So that's the payment for the 11 million, which would be a $1 million
Correct.
annual payout. Okay.
So we would need to show that we can generate those funds from our lessees, the other departments, to be able to pay that debt service.
I guess we're doing comments and questions, or you want to come back for comments?
Let's try to stick with questions at this point, but there've been general comments about, going to the Budget Committee, things like that. I don't want to cut you off on that. No? Okay. 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 Okay, all right. Okay, yeah. Okay, so if you got a comment, go ahead, make it, yeah.
I have a lot of comments. One thing, that takes us in a whole different direction. Okay, I basically agree with the basic concept of moving forward, assuming we're going to pull it all together somehow, and then at the point where we realize that we can't pull it together, making the decisions about what's going to be cut or not cut at that point. So the staff recommendation is fine, is fine with me. The one thing I just kind of want to say about the Budget Committee, I haven't felt good about the fact that the Budget Committee is just three of us. That really is probably the most important thing that we touch on, and probably should have the largest participation in it. But that's not exactly where we're at. But I'm not incredibly confident in any value that we would get from the Budget Committee by itself, looking at this in any more detail than anyone else. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Chris, I would suggest if that does get scheduled for around December 8th, that we send out an email to everybody so that everybody can participate, be there, at least observe, participate to the extent the committee wants. Because that is an important point, obviously, on this one. Jessica, I've got a fair number of questions. I'm going to try to make them as surgical as possible. On historic tax credits, when will we know that number, especially as that impacts our budget and our ability to go out for bid?
Sure. So, Mayor, the complication that we've ran into with the historic tax credits is if we borrow. So we've had several conversations, Andy's had several conversations with the bond council saying if you do lease financing, there may be an issue with also getting historic tax credits, because the way that we as a non-taxed entity would get tax credits would be through sort of a complex lease structure where we would lease the building long-term to an LLC that we would control, but say it's Billings City Hall LLC. They, for IRS purposes, take ownership by having a long-term lease, say 50-year lease. Then that entity can then sell the tax credit, can then get the tax credits, then they can sell it to a third party. So that that third party can use those tax credits, right, to offset their tax liability. Then the value that the city gets would be less than 100% because we are going to pay 9% commission to our consultant. And then also for it to be a value to the third party, they want to get a discount to buy and use those tax credits. So conservatively, maybe 80% of qualifying tax credits is what the city would then end up with funding-wise. So we would get the funds at the time. Usually there's a couple different times during, you sign the contract and you maybe get a certain percentage up front, and then at the conclusion of the project, and maybe even Councilmember Gulick can speak more to this since he has experience with it. But my understanding is that you would get a percentage sort of up front when you sign the contract, and then you get the remainder when the project's complete and all of the tax credit qualifying expenses have been qualified and confirmed.
Okay, so that addresses the amount of benefit to us. I wasn't hearing it was potentially a no-go, it's just a significant discount on the benefit to us. A, is that correct? And B, still, when is the timing when that would shake out, that we would have a better idea of the dollars that we could derive?
So I think at the time that we would be under contract, so when we do that guaranteed maximum price with Dick Anderson, and we know what our qualifying expenses are, we would have a good idea of what the value of those tax credits would be. And that's provided that doing any sort of lease financing wouldn't complicate the matter.
Okay, we'll need to dig into that more. I understood about 10% of what you just said, but it's obviously really important, right?
Yes.
And so if you could have that figured out by tomorrow, that'd be great. So also then on these options, I want to clarify the last one, leasing space to tenants, 38,000 square feet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that's not just a revenue benefit item. Nothing is built into our cost numbers for build out of that 38,000 square feet. So yes, we might derive lease revenue, but we would have an offsetting additional build-out cost or reduction in our lease. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor, that would be correct.
So we may derive very real benefit long-term from leasing this, but like any landlord, you got to put the money in before you can get it out. So that reduces the benefit that we could get there. One of the critical elements of options 2 and everything following is not to build out immediately the second courtroom. We know that the city from experience the city council could locate into the one completed courtroom. What about the other the other judge that we just approved tonight? It's one thing for us because we're on an alternate hour schedule. Do we know if the 2 judges could co-locate, and if so, forever or for a while, for what? And Gina may want to comment on that too, but to the extent, do we know on that? Or have a sense of that?
I'm not sure.
Mayor and council, I think that might be a possibility short-term, but it's really hard to get out my crystal ball here. It's really hard to know what the second municipal court judge, how they would run their court. We know currently that Judge Kolar does utilize both courtrooms at times, and I would expect that a second elected municipal court judge would want to run a courtroom at the same time as the other judge is running a courtroom. So while I think that they could coordinate and do that, you wouldn't be getting the biggest bang for your buck. It wouldn't be as efficient.
I would encourage us to talk with Judge Kolar about that option and try to figure out if they could, be there certain days or hours or night court or the weekend, all of those issues, because it looks like that's a real possibility. And my last question, and I also support kicking this to the Budget Committee. The more discussion, the better, but I would encourage all of us to also participate there. But I apologize, I lost my train of thought. Well, I guess the bottom line for me is that there's a reason that we have the design that we have. And now I'm remembering, and I would like us to default to option one as much as possible and reject that only when we have to. I mean, if we truly have to. And my main reason is efficiency. This concept that it would cost us an extra 50 cents on the dollar to delay, not to eliminate costs, but to delay certain costs a certain number of years is pretty frightening. And that brings me then to my question. What's the source of that 50% number? Obviously, we know generically it's demobilization, remobilization, and inflation. But if our income increases at the same rate of inflation, there's no actual net cost to that. But our experience over the last few years has been that the rate of inflation in construction has been significantly more than the cost of our income. So we really throw money into the garbage can by delaying anything and not building it, but you still have to have a way to pay it back. So can you comment a little bit more about that 50% number? Does that assume how long of a delay? Because that would increase the amount of inflation adjustment in there. So can you comment on that 50% cost from delay?
Sure, I'm going to defer to the team. I don't know if you want to talk about it or.
I'll jump in. Great question. Something we're struggling with nearly every day. But inflation is the bulk of it. We'd estimated those roughly about a three-year delay between kind of when the final completion of the project would be and when that next project of a build out of a courtroom, for example, would happen. So we estimated roughly 3 years just to give us a frame of reference of where that would be, maybe more, maybe less. And also, again, the remobilization fees really do start adding up, specifically when you're going to an occupied building, right? There's just a lot more, you'd be that much more careful, that much more tedious to get and schedule. It's just a lot less efficient through construction. I think ultimately, there's other things within that number that would be potential future design fees. There's a lot more involved of going back in surgically into an existing building like that instead of the whole kind of scale remodel that we're looking for. The 50 does sound, and the intention by no means was to scare anybody. It does sound frightening, don't get me wrong. But it really is when you start penciling this out of what we could potentially see on the scale of what we're looking at, especially these chunks of this project that we're looking at cutting off. We're looking sub $500,000, give or take. That economy scale just isn't there. It would be different if it was 38,000 square feet of a floor plate, for example. We could average that dollar per square foot out more over top of that floor plate. But the fact that we're, say, building out these small pieces in this existing building, we have some upfront savings, but long-term, it will be more. So.
Okay, all righty. On that issue, before we continue down.
I think maybe even your last comment was sort of implied as well, but when you have lots of little projects, you're not going to have as competitive a bidding environment because people are really motivated to get the big kahuna, and if you don't land that, then it's just you have far fewer numbers of people who are interested in bidding on those, so it's just not as competitive in addition to the lower economies of scale.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on then. Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The mayor kind of asked a little piece of the question that I had in mind, which is that if we're talking about, and I will say up front that I'm for going with option number one and figuring out how we can pull back from that rather than piece and parcels. And this is said by a person who lived in a house that never got completed, just to say. So one of the things I think maybe wasn't emphasized that could be emphasized a little bit more when we're talking about going with options that are delaying or phasing out is that it's not attractive for a business to lease a building that's in the middle of something that doesn't look attractive. If you're talking about retail, that's my thinking. And I would say that even as our leasee, the county has a floor in there, it becomes less and less attractive to lease something that's in a constant muddle of not being something. And so I think part of the cost of phasing out is that it wouldn't be attractive. Number one. Number two, and you have that option, that measure, which is quality of service we deliver to the public. In a very phased out, muddled process where we're, just barely moving forward, what a customer is going to feel coming into that building may not actually be what we want to present as a city or as a public utility. So I think there are some really deeper costs than what we're really thinking about. A lot of constituents have asked me, what is the city hall and what is it and what are you doing and what's it going to be like? And they have an expectation that they're going to arrive at a building where they can do business efficiently and walk back out. And if we're not going to deliver that, they're going to ask me, why the heck did we pay all that money for that building if it just feels muddled up and never completed? And I think there are real costs to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Owen, are you still with us?
I am, Mayor.
It's all yours.
Thanks. I just have a couple questions, Jessica. I think I share the sentiment of a number of council members who are generally in favor of trying to find a way to do the full project scope rather than sort of piecemeal or delay things. So in that scenario, is $11 million the gap we have to cover? As recognizing we haven't bid the project, lots of things could change. Right now, it's $11 million that we have to close the gap on.
Yes, Councilmember Owen, it's about 11 million.
Okay, and does that include furniture, fixtures, and equipment? Are we putting desks and chairs and everything in the building at that cost?
Yes, that doesn't include furniture for private offices, but it does include meeting room furniture, furnishing, all the public spaces, and doing workstations for open office areas.
Okay, and that leads nicely into my next question. I recall at an earlier presentation that perhaps for those non-general fund departments, that they would be charged for their own office furniture. Is that correct?
Yes, Councilmember Owen, that is correct.
So other than their own internal office furniture, is the current project status that non-general fund departments are being charged zero?
Yes, that is correct, Councilmember Owen.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. So, Mayor, if I just could real quickly, Councilmember Purrington had asked a question directly to the Budget Committee. If we do get a chance to work on this, and I hope Council will give us a chance to do a deep dive here, would we be looking at changes in scope? My personal preference would be that if we do, and I think we should, they would be things we cut for good, not just how do we defer and do later. But I think it's worth noting, I think there's actual real value in having the Budget Committee take a look at this and do a deeper dive, particularly because of the members who are on it. You have Councilmember Boyette, who has a long history in banking and project finance. If there's going to be, maybe we do this instead of that in the build out, I don't think there's a council member more qualified than Councilmember Gulick to work on it. I certainly am the least qualified of those three members to have an opinion, but I still have about a decade of experience in working in government budgets, making tough cuts, figuring out how to structure things over fiscal years. I actually think the Budget Committee can do a lot of good in providing some thoughts and recommendations for council to consider and debate as we sort of make the decisions here. My preference is to certainly find a way to close that gap. I think we can close that gap. I'm actually moderately optimistic that that's doable. So I think those are the thoughts that I would share, and thank you, Jessica, for answering those questions.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese is next.
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quick, because I didn't understand Jennifer's question, Councilman Owen's question about who's being charged zero. Can you explain what her question was about?
So I think Kevin will comment on that.
Thank you.
So, Councilmember Neese, when we were talking about financing and using the ARPA money and stuff, way back at the start of this project, we had talked about, okay, can building contribute money for their build out their square footage and stuff? Can other departments? But the general fund money didn't have that option. So when we started putting those numbers together, what we just said was that, okay, we're not going to charge out the build-out costs for those types of departments. We're just going to, divvy up the money when our budget, when we're coming in at budget or something with the ARPA money. So at that point, no, we had not made individual departments contribute to build-out cost, or we weren't thinking of going down that road. Now, with one of those options, you're seeing that, can some of these non-general fund departments contribute to the build-out cost? That's one of our funding option sections there.
I see. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so I do have some questions. First of all, I agree with about the budget committee. I think we'll get valuable look at that. I also agree. Option one is really the way to look at. I guess I share some experience with Councilman Joy on not finished projects, and I think we need, if we're going to do it, we need to do it. But I do have some other questions just to clarify, because I was on the selection committee and we looked at this, and this is going to be really asking you, Kevin, this. Would you recall what the new build-out cost we were quoted at the time? If we were going to build new?
If we were going to build new, I don't recall what that number was.
Do you know what the current new build-out cost is?
Oh, the current new
Per square foot?
I'll have Shane talk about that.
I'm Shane Floor with Dick Anderson Construction. So we have done multiple different pricing exercises across the state. With as large as we are, we see just about every type of building that's out there. But for a building, certainly 100,000+ square foot is an oddity to have something that's large, that's office space. With that being said, 40,000, 50,000 square feet, we are seeing between 450 and 500,000 just in building costs.
Okay.
So, 450 to 500 a square foot.
Okay, that's good to know, because I think, thank you very much for that. Because I think when we first looked at that, it was 152 a square foot, and now, and by the way, I think your comment, Mayor, or your question, Mayor, was asking, is that 204 square foot based upon the build-out square foot of 211,000? That's not correct. I think if we looked at the build-out, it was 111,000 for option number one. Or 117,000, let's see, where it is. The option one is 117,000. So we're actually around 200 and, I think, and maybe I did my math around 374 a square foot, which is still be below new. And so I still think we need to move forward on the option one. I'm sorely disappointed in how things have progressed, because I think given the information we had, we've already increased 59% in our costs. So waiting any longer, I think you suggest it's going to be 50% more. I can tell you it's going to be more than that. It's going to be double more. So I don't think we should wait. I wasn't sure about the chillers. My understanding was we had redundancy already built in on the chillers. We had an inspection done. They said the chillers were there. They would work for years to come, 10 years or so. And now we're finding out we have, one chiller, and if we don't replace that, we're not going to have chillers. And then same thing with redundancy and electricity. Can you explain to me what the difference was between when we bought it in the inspection and now what we're having to replace?
Great question. So chillers, break that up. The chillers specifically, you're right. The initial report said chillers with maintenance and some small amount of work, we could keep them going. I think through the actual process of opening, using and operating the building as it is now, there's one chiller that is on its absolute last leg. Something to the point where we were getting regular updates from the maintenance staff that we need to do something about this now. So to say that we're depending on that as an actual viable backup, I think would be incorrect. So if we weren't to do it, that being said, the one that is there currently is something that is maintaining, is operating, can go forward, but again, for how long, we don't necessarily know. So it's a risk with that. So going into it now that we know it's been operating and taken care of now, it needs to be fixed. It's just not what the initial reports are saying.
Okay, so does that mean the reports that we have were incorrect?
I wouldn't say incorrect, but probably did not have the information to really see how that was operating. I think the firsthand experience of actually having and taking care of that piece of equipment has changed the opinion of what that is, right?
Is there anything else that we were told in these reports that now we're finding out that we have to replace and it's costing us, and specifically, how much is this adding to the budget?
Right. I'll have to get back to you on how much that would be adding into it. But from an electrical perspective, that was another big risk area that we were really focused on. That the way that the power is distributed through the building is of a building, a federal building of this era that would have, it's just not widely used anymore, right? It's becoming more and more specialized. So there was extensive testing done to IR testing, infrared testing, to make sure that that system would be usable going forward. Great news on that front. It is usable, it is manageable. We have found equipment that will be able to work with that system. So great news, and it mitigated a lot of risk, and was well worth the dollar spent on looking deeper into that issue.
Okay.
There are some other variables that we know on the building, right? The roof isn't new. Like there's things that we're not touching with this project, that could be issues coming up, but something that we'd be prepared in the future to take care of. So.
Okay. And then one other question I have, because I have a lot of different things, but on the third floor, the county is there now.
Yes.
Is this plan considering renovating that before the city moves into that, when the county moves out, or is this all contingent the county staying right now? We're leaving that build as is.
Right. That third floor would be left as is, and nearly all of the options that we went through. A couple of reasons. Number one, again, for lease space, that would, if the county were to move out, that entire floor plate would be leasable space. So
Okay.
of that 38,000 square feet, there'd be additional roughly 17,000 square feet or so that they're currently occupying that could be leasable for the future. But if we didn't want to count on that space coming back to the project, given the time frame that we're on and their lease coming back in, we didn't want to count that they'd be, getting removed from the building itself. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you. I think I suspect option number one makes the most sense. That's sort of my default position for a lot of the reasons we've been talking about. But I still want to see the numbers. I think we all would want to see that. I think what we need to do is we see specific numbers in terms of the costs of build out and what some of the costs of delay would be. But I think the costs of having to continue to lease other spaces, we've seen them listed and as the funding options as sort of factors, but we can't really, it's hard to assign a number, the magnitudes of that kind of thing. So I think before the budget committee were to look at it, and I would advocate that we take a look at that. But that's what I'd like to see if we can flesh that out more. And again, these are our best guess. We have to list what the assumptions are behind it, but that would be really helpful. Because again, there's the cost to lease the other spaces that we have. There's the mobilization, all those things that are there. But I guess it looks like you want to make comment on that.
Yeah, Councilmember Gulick, thank you. So when we went last week, we had a meeting, probably 2 hours with Andy, and we're kind of going through all the budget options and things that we could bring to council, package together of what are some decisions that could be made. And we do have all that data put together in terms of what each department is paying right now. So what the departments in City Hall are paying, what the departments that have leases are paying. Some of actually like engineering that's over in the depot building, their costs, their annual costs would actually go down moving into this versus what they're paying for lease space right now. But when we look at, the tenants in City Hall, they're obviously gonna go up. And then also square footage is going up because courts right now, their footprint is almost doubling or more than. And so they're gonna take up a lot more space, so their costs are going significantly up. So, but yes, we do have all that data that we can bring to that meeting.
Okay, great. And then I think maybe a question, maybe it's for Kevin, or maybe it's, if we were to do debt service, again, which I think is warranted, I hopefully it doesn't interfere with any of the tax credit stuff, but, because I think that the debt service, yeah, you take on the interest costs, but then you are, I think the remobilization costs would obviate that. So I think it makes sense. What kind of constraints are there on our debt service in terms of ability to bond without, or, what, can you remind us what some of those constraints might be?
Yeah, Councilmember Gulick, the main constraint is, can our departments afford what the debt service is? I mean, that's our constraint that we have to work within, and that's why we have to pull those costs together. So what can each department that is moving over there, what can they actually afford in debt service?
And then maybe just lastly, I think if we'll look at that, not just the worst case scenarios, we'll look at something in the middle between, or we'll look at the range for each one of the options, I think would make sense for us and help us all make a decision. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Shaw, you've got the last word.
That's right. I'm going to bring it home. You started this by asking, are we on the right track? I think yes. I share what sounds to me like consensus of we stick with option one unless we just absolutely cannot, especially because I think we need that second court immediately, pretty much immediately. Should this go to the budget committee? I say, why not? I don't see how that hurts anything. Come back with a recommendation. The mayor suggested we all show up, and I would say that's going to turn it into a council meeting. So I would say maybe we don't do that and we let them bring a recommendation, but that's just my suggestion. And then, yeah, the mayor can show up.
It will be noticed, I guess, so that we could show up.
We could, yes, yeah.
But no obligation.
Yes, the chaos of it, I think, could easily get out of control versus having 3 people able to really dive deeply into this. I think that's a better option, in my opinion. And then, so for funding options, I share Councilmember Owen's optimism that I think we can close $11 million gap, fingers crossed. And I look forward to seeing those options on December 19th. 2 questions I have for Matt, our resident broker. One is 38,435 leasable square feet. What are we looking at for if that all got leased immediately? What is the market rate on that?
Net to the city would be about $500,000.
Okay.
Anywhere from 400 to 600,000. Our initial pro forma is around $11 to $14 a square foot net. That doesn't necessarily take into account build out. So we have the ability to kind of package that in with a tenant fit out. So, but we've been budgeting somewhere in that 11 to 14.
Okay, thank you. And then one more for you. Approximately how long is it taking to move a big commercial property like this current City Hall, for example?
So the current City Hall is very unique in that it's a large piece. I would say both on the Stillwater building and the lease space. We have some very unique space that's not available on the market. We don't have a lot of contiguous space available in downtown Billings. It's a lot of onesie twosie stuff. So having large contiguous space may interest larger users, which is a good thing. This project, just because of its location, I think will have some interest. There's still a lot of larger developers, out-of-state developers, that are looking for projects in downtown Billings, Billings in general. This is a fun rehab project. We've looked at it as if it was going to be a rehab project. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts to this building. There's a lot of different levels. That creates risk. So we're trying to mitigate that risk by also maximizing the return for the city by packaging it in a way to best maximize that investment. So.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, council, it looks like there's a quick wrap up. All right, We do want to finish up. It's 9 o'clock, so we'll make it quick.
This
Councilor
was
Boyd?
just, since that I'm on the budget committee, three of us talking with a cup of coffee versus the staff, everybody else showing up. I don't want to do that. Why don't we just have a work session if that's what we're going to do? It serves the same purpose.
May not be necessary if other people don't want to show up.
No, but I mean, but I agree with Councilman Shaw that you get this many people, it's a detraction rather than a helper.
Okay, good point.
So, Mayor, I'd want to just make one kind of clarification in speaking with Jessica. So the gap that we're currently showing is about $13 million, okay? I just wanted I think it was stated it was 11, but it is $13 million. And part of that, when we first started out with, giving you numbers and stuff, we weren't considering those soft costs because at the very start of it, we were comparing, when we were looking at having the Stillwater built out by another person, things of that nature, and none of those costs were included. And so we've started to throw those back in there. So that's some of the differences coming up. But I just did want to clarify that we do have a $13 million gap, not an $11 million
But Kevin, is that before or after the reduction for value engineering?
That is how it sits right now, because those numbers that you're seeing, the 43 million in option one, has the value engineering subtracted out.
Okay. Thanks for the good news. You got anything else for us, Kevin? Okay, yeah, thank you. Councilor Purington?
Chris had a hand up.
That's okay. Councilor Purington,
Okay.
go ahead.
So just two comments, kind of questions. So this does not include any O&M. We don't know how much it's going to cost to maintain this building once we get in there.
Yeah, so Councilmember Purington, we have taken the data that we got from the previous owner, the data that we know from maintaining this building, what we know from maintaining that building for a year now, and we have an estimate that if it's fully occupied, it's sort of a range. It could be 1 million to 1.5 million, depending on what sort of tenants we have in there, if we have lease spaces or not. But yes, we do know that there'll be operating costs that are not included in any of these numbers.
And then my other concern is, and this is for you guys, is that, so how would the departments make up, because I think you said they're about $500,000 short, how will they make those up? Through increasing their assessments?
So, Councilmember Purington, number one, we want to attack, the general build-out cost. How, where's that going to flesh out if we're going, if we are going to go with option one, where's that flesh out? How much of that can we take off? And then, yes, I mean, we'll look to departments for, what type of expenses can you be cutting? Is it overtime issues? Is it things like that? Some departments can charge fees to cover those costs, the tenant costs of us being the landlord. Building department, similar situation. So it's mainly, we got to deal with the general fund departments of, where can they come up with those costs? And then how can we try to minimize those costs as much as possible? And again, as Matt said, the more leasable space we get built out and leased out, that just goes to those operating costs so we can reduce, expenses to our tenants, our city general fund tenants.
Okay, Councilor Bernice, and we'll try to wrap up here.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, I just wanted one more point that actually Councilmember Joy mentioned too. I just want to make sure that you hear it for more than her. But I really firmly agree that we still need, that co-location is still a primary goal of this. And that's one of the reasons, again, I support option one, because the city and the people are expecting us to be in one location. And I think that's where we need to move forward on. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
Mayor, could I just ask, you had asked a question earlier about inflation, and I think it was helpful to hear from the architect. That's a really important part of this conversation. I'd like Dick Anderson to have a shot and also provide an information there, because I think, you go through a project like this and you certainly gain a different level of respect for developers. I've only built a couple of significant municipal projects. They are stressful. So I think this conversation about what inflation has been and where we anticipate the future to be matters to this decision that you're going to be asked to make over the next 30 days.
Very good. Shane, if you can address that in particular, tell us what kind of percentage you were contemplating for inflation over the next 3 years.
Yeah, so first to start, I mean, in 20, when COVID hit, from that time to today, we have seen an increase in between 48 to about 53% in general building costs across the state. So that's the Intermountain Rocky area, which right now in all of the states is the most expensive area to build in all of the United States.
And again, that number was 48?
About 48 to 53%.
And
we get data like that through the MCA because they track that.
that was the beginning of 2020? So it'd be 2020, 2021.
The end of 19.
So 3 years.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So when we were asked to kind of look at a 3-year projection and where we might be, we settled on, well, it can't possibly be any worse than it is now. We have seen some things leveled. So I will tell you right now that we've seen things level, but we've also seen some exponential things kind of skyrocket. Mechanical equipment, plumbing, pipe, electrical. Give you just an anecdotal deal that, you know, our electrical engineer had mentioned a piece of equipment that he said, well, that's got to be a $7,000 piece of equipment. It was actually a $57,000 piece of equipment in today's market. So that gives you a little bit of an idea on what that slide scale is on where things are going. Now, structural steel, that's leveled. Steel studs, it's leveled. There are certain things that have leveled. They have peaked and kind of just stayed there. So we're not anticipating anything more than probably, you know, and I would say this conservatively, probably 5 to 8% that we're going to see every year coming up. If it goes any more than that, then we're all in a world of hurt with what's going on in the world already. And I think it's going to dump us back into a recession. And I think building costs are going to get real cheap if something like that happens. But there's going to also be a backlog in the market of the world with electrical and mechanical equipment and everything else. They're going to lay off people, and we're going to be right where we're at for years and years and years to come. So to the point, you know, we looked at that compounded number. I can't speak fully to the 50 because I know that AJ and Nick kind of worked through numbers on their sides. But yeah, I mean, we got to that. It's not hard to imagine getting to 50% once you have to remobilize and demobilize. Once you have to put a tower on to get stuff to the 5th floor, right? If we don't build the 5th floor out. And by the way, I'm not a proponent of not doing that 5th floor build out because that's the hardest one to get to. I mean, logistically for me as a pre-con guy, that's the hardest one to get to. If you guys put your council chambers on the 1st floor, that'd be a much better location to go, right? But I'm not here to talk to that. I'm simply here to just kind of fill in some information for you. So does that answer your question?
It's helpful for me, and you, Chris, you raised it, so thank you very much. Very helpful. Okay, council, let's call it a wrap, although we've still got our next item, which is still on the Billings Government Center, as I like to call the building formerly known as Stillwater Building, or whatever, until something else comes along. There's no public hearing on what we just did, so we'll just call that one done and move to item number 5 and ask Denise to read item number 5.
Approval of bid package number 1, contract amendment with Dick Anderson Construction for the new City Hall project. Staff recommends approval.
Very good. We know a lot about this, but Jessica, remind us in case we forgot.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. This is for bid pack 1, which is those long lead items that we need to get ordered and some select demolition for the first step of the construction project. I don't have a presentation because we just talked about it, but if you have any questions, let me know.
Are there questions for Jessica? Okay. Is there a motion? Councilmember Shaw.
Yes, I move to approve bid package number 1, contract amendment with Dick Anderson Construction for new City Hall project as recommended by staff.
Second by Councilmember Boyette. Discussion or further questions? Anything from council before we proceed to a vote? Okay, so the motion is for approval. You got the staff recommendation in your packet. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. If everything could be that quick. That concludes item number 5. Item number 6. Denise, would you read item number 6?
City Administrator's annual performance evaluation and approval of employment contract.
Okay, and on this one, the red line version of the Chris's contract was emailed around to the council today. We got the clean version in our packet last week. I'll just kind of remind everybody, and Chris is handing out another copy of that for anybody who's interested. But the main holdup, as you'll recall at our last meeting, because we delayed this, was Section 7 that was titled Retirement and Health Savings Account. And the particular concern was that if Chris, instead of taking this 12% deferred comp as deferred comp, took it as additional cash payment, that it could be deemed part of his base salary. And if it were part of his base salary, then the next year, and he took it, that part could be added on top of the base salary. And then the year after that, added on top of the base salary, so that after a while, that stacking would create a weird look, shall I say, when we went out to find a new city administrator, a weird look in the eyes of the public, et cetera, et cetera. So this new language just says that it could be taken as additional cash compensation, but specifically says that it isn't base salary and won't be included when looking at any sort of increase of base salary, nor will it be, and I appreciate Councilmember Neese's identification of this issue, it would not be considered as current base rate of pay, which is how severance is calculated. So it would not count to increase severance or increase the base salary. So that's how that was resolved. Councilmember Neese and Boyette, you were involved in those discussions. Do you want to comment further on that issue or anything else? Nope. Okay, Councilmember.
I think you covered it well. Thank you.
Okay. So do we have a motion or questions? Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the employment contract with Chris Kowalski as city administrator as written, with the highlighted blue lines.
Yep, okay. Yes. Councilmember Tiswell is indicating a second. Any discussion? Councilmember Purington?
So, I think it came up beforehand with the general business expenses, that there is not a limit to those, or what those would look like as far as budgetary items within that, agreement.
Or looking at section 8, where it says general business expenses.
I don't know if we can look at beyond just section 7.
Sure. It says, subject to annual budgetary approval by the commission, and then page 5, employer agrees to budget and pay for professional. So there's a list of things that the city is committing to pay for: travel, professional dues, et cetera, et cetera. And that none of that's being changed, but that would be where you would look to address that issue, I suppose.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, sorry. But I'm just saying, there's not a limit to that, because I think the mayor is a member of the mayor's conference, and that's like, what, $50,000 a year or something?
Well, no.
It was in the
Oh, maybe
bills.
there was a dues for National Conference of Mayors,
That's what it was.
not 50 grand. It may be
It was-
5 or 7.
Remember,
something like
I
that.
sent that to you.
Yes, I'm sorry, Councilmember Purington, you're referring to memberships in groups in that case, and I don't recall the number, but yes, the city is a member of National League of Cities and U.S. Conference of Mayors. That's different than this, in that this is saying, well, there are other equivalent things. I am a member of the International City County Managers Association. Those dues are paid, and I do not always, but regularly attend the national conference annually. So it in essence, emphasizes that investing in my training and education is important, but we've never had a fight, and I wouldn't want to fight over the budget. If we had to cut something in the budget and that needed to be changed, or that those limits, you have the budget authority at the end of the year. I mean, am I going to say the contract says you must let me grow in anything I want to join?
But I guess that's my point, is that we don't know. Whenever you say you have budget control, we don't know what that is.
Well, yeah, you approve the budget, and there's a budgeted line item for expenses, for training, for things like that. So, yeah, I don't come to you and say, the League of Cities this year is going to cost $752. Are you okay with the $752? But in the budget, there's enough money for the staff to attend the league. I go to ICMA, if it's 20.
But I think, Chris, that's not what I'm getting at, because it's not, I'm not trying to nickel dime this. What I'm trying to get a grasp on is because whenever we approve budget and budget expenses, we don't know what that entails. And, I mean, to me, it's very open-ended, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So when you say, well, you approve it, you're going, yeah, but more times than not, we don't know what we're approving within those expenses.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing is it's a big package without a lot of granular breakdown. So at some point, probably good to see on a more granular level what goes into those numbers, I guess is what you're asking for. And I don't know about the specifics, how big that number is or where that would fall, but if it's part of a much larger $100,000 budget, obviously you're not spending $100,000. There's a lot of other things in there. But maybe you're spending 99. I doubt it. So look at that, I guess. I mean, I don't think it changes this. I think it falls to us more on the budget side to look at that more carefully, I guess. And I don't want anybody to think that I part of a. Yeah, look it up, and yeah, that sounds strange. So let's follow up on that. I'm not aware of that. Put it that way. Councilmember Denise.
Mayor, thank you. I've been a part of creating some other executive directors' salaries, and this is the very standard to pay for their training, some of their expenses, things like that. And so you're right. I think if we're interested, we can investigate the budget, talk to Andy. Every time we see our packet, we approve expenses, and it'll have a category in there, and those are the times to question those. But I think everything in here is appropriate, and I think I would support all the items that are listed in here.
Okay, all righty, thank you. Okay. Yeah. It might be the mayor and, now I'm thinking about the mayor and council budget for all of that. Okay, well, we don't want to get into it. Okay, all righty. Okay, very good. Anything else on this? Chris, you had something else?
Could I just say, before I lose the opportunity, thank you to you again. Thanks for the evaluation. Thanks for getting here. And most importantly, on my side, truly, without the staff, I wouldn't be in this position succeeding at the things we're succeeding at. So they really are the foundation. Those subject matter experts running those departments allow me to spend my time with you and in our community and working in my role. So just a big thank you to them, provided you approve this contract. And I get the pleasure of getting to work for you for at least another 3 years. So thank you.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that, and thank you to staff. Council will proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval of the red line version of the employment agreement, Chris's employment agreement. If in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes, one vote in opposition.
Did Councilmember Owen?
Councilmember Owen, did we get your vote on that?
Yeah, yes. I don't know if you heard me or not, but it's a yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that clarification. That concludes item 6. Any public comment on non-agenda items this evening? No one is online and no one is coming forward present. So we'll close the public comment period on non-agenda items. Any council initiatives? Councilmember Boyette.
I just have a simple question for Kevin. If it's 13 million we need and we just authorized 2.2, does that make it 3.8 we're after, or we're still after 13 million?
Yeah, I mean, you just spent 2.2, so that's part of those expenses, that were coming
13.
through. Yeah.
We still need 13.
Councilmember Ripsis, you had something there?
Yes, thank you. Council, I meant to disclose something during the consent agenda, and I failed to do it because it sailed through, and item 1B wasn't separated like I totally expected that it would be. So I apologize for that, but I wanted to disclose that I do work for Matt Robertson in my professional capabilities. I do software development for him for a company that is not NAI. It's a separate company that he owns. And I spoke with with our city attorney and mayor earlier today just to see how we should handle this. There's no direct financial impact to me for anything related to this contract that we just approved for him, but felt it was safe to disclose that. So apologize for missing that earlier.
Thank you very much. Councilor Tricky.
Mr. Administrator, do you have an update for us on what's going on with the shelter? Anything new or?
Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we're meeting at the low barrier shelter location next door to City Hall with the building division and fire. I will tell you, the staff has presented, and you actually have a copy of the documents, public document, very specific, requirements and steps that need to be taken in order to comply with the code. So that's our next meeting is tomorrow, hopefully to answer any questions and make sure they understand what that looks like. They'll have an architect representative there as well, and that's the latest.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Boyette.
I got to ask a question. Didn't the COC figure this out before they asked for the money that they needed to do this? Wouldn't that have been appropriate for them to know what they needed to do?
Sure. I think in fairness to them, though, we got a whole lot of chicken and egg here relative to where was the funding going to go and what was going to happen. So I want to be careful and respectful of the fact that, this has been completely provided by nonprofits and donors from the beginning of time to now. So,
Mayor, can you please remind council members to turn their mics on? It's really hard to hear.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Owen, did you hear were you able to hear the question even if it was difficult?
Nope.
Okay, so the question from Councilmember Boyette was, why didn't Continuum of Care address the code issue before we appropriated money? And
just
Chris
so you
was
know,
saying,
there
go ahead,
was
Chris.
dialogue. There has been dialogue. There certainly was a big break as to whether the shelter was going to be there or not. And hindsight, sure, if they knew they were going to get the funds, yes. Both sides have been working off the same code. The code has not changed. The rules have not changed. But I want to be careful relative to, all the work they've been doing this year and in prior years to keep people safe and warm.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Bernice.
Just on the topic, so has any money been dispersed? And if
No.
if this turns out that they can't put it there, then we'll have to figure something else out. Right now, they're just being cared for by other organizations like the MRM and that.
Yes, we have cut the check. The check is at the admin office so that if they get to the point where they can get going, then we're not waiting on bill pays and days. But to my knowledge, that check has not been handed over. I'm very confident that's still the case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Council, we should conclude. Thank you very much. Thank you for your discussion. Go buy lottery tickets on the condition you give your great winnings to the City of Billings for the Stillwater Building. Thank you, everybody.